Work session for the May 16th, 2017 session of the Salt Lake City Council. Our council chair, Councilmember Penfold, is on his way and should be here shortly. So in the meantime, you are stuck with me. The first four items on our agenda are written briefings. So I just want to bring everyone's attention to those, so those of you following along at home can figure out why we're jumping to item number 5. But the first is the proposed finance department budget. The second is the proposed compensation budget. Third is the proposed consolidated fee schedule ordinance. And the fourth is the tax and revenue anticipation notes series 2017. So before we move on, does anybody have any comments, questions, or discussions about any of those four items?
Mr. Chair, I do. I have a question, and it's in regards to the compensation budget.
Okay.
So, I don't know, and mine's more, maybe you could help me explain this. If an employee is represented employee versus non-represented represented employee, and what's the difference between, what's the step increase compared to the 1% base salary increase?
Look, Ben, I'm wondering if we should see if it's someone from the administration could
From HR
answer
or?
that so that we aren't, yes. Save you from.
So our HR Director, Julio Garcia. Welcome, Julio.
Hello, thank you. So I don't have the data in front of me, but if you're scheduled for a step increase, that is outlined in the MOUs and in our comp plan. And actually, I feel like I should run down and grab that because it will vary. Do you happen to have a copy of that?
We can come back to it too.
Yeah.
We,
Okay, so if you are in, actually, you know what? I would like to come back.
yeah, we can
Okay.
do that, Julio, just so you've got everything that you need.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can bring that back in the unresolved issues part of the budget.
Okay. So any other questions, comments about the first four items on our agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 5, the administration's review update, or revenue update and budget overview. Mary Beth Thompson is our finance director, and John Vike, the city budget manager. If you could both come up to the table. And I'll turn the time over to you, Mary Beth.
So I'm going to present the revenues, and then John's going to do the expenditures. This was my old position, but the individual that is taking over for me has only been in the position for about 3 to 4 weeks. I didn't think it was fair to them for them to present the revenue, so I'll present. So I'll present the revenue portion of it, and then John will present the expenditure portion of the budget.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the first slide that we have is property tax. This shows you all the different types of property tax, be it real property, personal property, motor vehicle, judgment levies, and the RDA recognition. So that would be that the RDA, we have to recognize the revenue inside the general fund, but we also transfer it out to the RDA, and that was by state auditors' compliance. To note, this year, property taxes are going to be calculated all separately. In previous years, property taxes have been calculated together for new growth. This year, it's going to be broken out. It's going to be a new year. And Jennifer and I do not know exactly how it's going to turn out, but we're excited to see how it's going to turn out. So, the next slide is sales tax. Sales tax is coming in about $1.2 million above budget. I project that'll be a little bit higher. These projections were done as of March. We are working on April projections, and I can have updated information to you if you choose. But we put in an additional 1.25% increase to the tune of about a $2.5 million above budget for this current, or FY18 budget. The next slide, this slide is a detail slide done by one of our analysts.
Yeah, scoot up a little bit closer to
Better?
the microphone. Perfect.
There you go. Okay.
There you go.
This next slide is a slide that's done by one of our analysts. One of the things that we are working on for the administration and also probably for the council is an economic trends analysis quarterly report. and that would give you all the sales tax data on a quarterly basis and the economic trends on a quarterly basis. So this slide I find fascinating and interesting because it tells you every single category and what the taxes were in 16 versus 17, the actuals on both.
A quick question about sales tax revenue. When do you anticipate that we're going to start seeing online sales tax just from some of the changes with Google in particular? Or with Amazon, not Google?
Online sales tax came in January.
Okay.
It was slow coming in, but I believe that they came in better in February. We have the numbers. We just haven't done the analysis work, but I can come back to you with the data on what February numbers came in at.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
The next slide is the difference between prior year versus the current year, percentage of change for eating and drinking. And it's been positive for quite a while, which is a good thing. You can see the downtown trends in people eating and drinking establishments. So these are all done by major categories inside all of Salt Lake City. The other thing to note that I was going to state was that inside the information we get from the tax commission, there is a lot of non-categorized. The analyst that does the sales tax is working on that right now, and he's going to go back, I believe, 10, maybe 20 years, pull those non-categorized numbers out because it's a big pot of money, and we're putting those in categories, so we'll have better data than we have currently.
Mary Beth, Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? Do we know why they are such wild swings there? I mean, this looks like somebody's bad EKG saying they're having a heart attack.
Yeah, sales tax is one of those, it's hard to put a handle on because some people do quarterly taxes, some people do monthly, some people have delays. When they get penalties or somebody goes in and does an audit on them, then you can get all that money in 1 month. So there's a lot of variables to that number.
Kind of like with personal tax, that when somebody decides, oh, this is the year I'm going to say my personal property tax is X, then suddenly we get a big surge.
Right.
So it's the same type of thing.
Similar
just
to that, yes.
depending when they
Yes.
do it. Okay, thank you.
And that slide does represent a change from the prior year. So it's up or down from whether the revenues are up
Prior
or
year.
down from the prior year.
The next one is the same slide, just for retail motor vehicle. On the first slide that I showed you in sales tax, you noticed that eating and drinking and retail motor vehicle are two of our highest revenue generators as far as sales tax is concerned. So I kind of just wanted to show you the percentage of change over the last 3 years. The last one is wholesale durable goods. These are the wholesale durable goods, and this is also a large revenue generator. So these three are the three large generators. The next slide is parking tickets, and parking tickets are going to come in at budget, and we have budgeted pretty close to budget for next year as well.
Mary Beth, could I back you up one?
Sure.
I think Lisa and I were just remarking how we kind of love these charts. These are really fun. And I'm noticing how there seems to be an inverse between motor vehicle and wholesale durable. And I know if I bought a new car, then I probably wouldn't go buy a new refrigerator that month. But as to the predictability, I wondered if you have noticed that they are inversely associated.
I haven't noticed these two particular, but what I would say is it happens, the trend is significant when we hit a recession, where eating and drinking significantly goes down and groceries go up. So you can see that trend for sure. So groceries now have stabilized. They used to be really high when we were in the recession. They came down, and eating and drinking establishments came up. So you do see that direct correlation between those two, but I haven't even thought about that here. That's an interesting thing.
Okay, thanks.
So now I've lost my train of thought, so it's okay.
Sorry about that.
Parking tickets. So parking tickets are going to come in at budget this year. The parking tickets that we are receiving actually are increasing, which is a good thing. For 17, they're bringing in a little bit more. They started in February. They started in
Mary
February.
Beth, they busted me. They got me.
Oh,
They got me. Somebody
that's-
stole my little ticket off my dashboard, my windshield wiper, and then I get a letter in the mail saying I owe like $280. I'm like, this is crazy. I never saw this. So I called them up, and I ended up paying $150. So I'm really upset about parking tickets.
No wonder they're up.
That's why I'm eyeballing you.
It almost feels like you stole his ticket.
They knew it was a
Mary
city
Beth.
council member out there. and they
Maybe I
grabbed it.
did. Wow. Thank you for making me laugh.
It happened to you too? We're all doing our part to make this budget come in as predicted.
Good. So parking meters are up. They're up for the current year, and we have increased them for next year. Utilization is up for parking meters, which is good, because that means people are getting used to the parking meters, and they're actually using the parking meters.
So complaints have gone down.
And complaints have
That-
gone down.
That was my question, and I don't know if it's
Yes.
fair to ask you that or if it's something that we ask someone else, but are we seeing greater acceptance of our system and having it work?
Yes, I think we are receiving complaints. Compliance has less complaints, and I could get you the percentage, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
That's
So
okay.
complaints have gone down, utilization is going up, and tickets are going up, so.
I have found that when I will take the time to show somebody how to get the app, that they are a lot happier to use our parking than they are if they have to put in the credit card at the site, and more problems occur at the site than if you're doing it through the app.
Right, and that's the trend we want to push everybody to, is an app instead of doing it by, the meters. Meters were paid for on a lease, and that lease will be due in the next couple of years. And then we have to figure out what we're going to do at that point in time. So the more we can get on the app, the better off Salt Lake City is going
And
to
I
be.
would just say, council members, I think all of us probably in the next few months in our newsletter, maybe want to have a little step by step. Here's how you get the app, and you can come park downtown and have it be easy and fun. And you can add time when you're having such a good time buying those food and drinks.
Right,
So-
that's right.
Mr. Chair, I just had another question about parking meters. So Mary Beth, can you help me understand why last year the actual amount that came in at like what, $3.3 million for parking meters, why would it jump from last year's budget of $3 million to $3.6 million? That's a kind of a huge jump to budget for. And just say, this is what we're budgeting for. Why wouldn't you just use last year's number as your budget for this year?
That's a good question. I think with the trend of the utilization, and also we have seen the construction downtown go away, so we don't have the bag meters, where you're going to see an increase in the parking meter utilization, because with all the construction, those meters are bagged, and we can't use them, and now those bags are coming off, so we've increased that projection.
So you think just based off of that alone, it accounts for a $600,000 increase?
I don't know that, but I can get back with you on that.
Okay, that'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary
Andrew?
Beth,
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we charge, don't we, as a city for the bagging?
We do charge for the bagging. We do charge for the bagging, but that's a separate number from this number here.
Okay.
Great. Andrew?
Is there any data on the amnesty, parking ticket amnesty that was presented last year, the idea?
Is there information pertaining to it?
Implemented?
It was implemented, and if there's information, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I could get that to you. The amnesty program was not as successful as we wanted, but the revenues have come in. The collection department or unit has done other things to receive that revenue instead, sent out more letters, but I can get the exact details on the organizations and how much they received.
Sure.
Okay,
Be nice to see.
okay.
Great. Other questions about parking? All right. Thank you.
So permit revenue is going to see a decrease. That's in the budget, $4 million from airport. That's a one-time. And then we have $2 million in the airport budget for this year that will go away next year. So, and the number of permits are going to stay flat, we hope. So the last slide just kind of tells you basically the major areas and where we increased revenues. The biggest increase obviously was sales tax. Property tax came in on top as well. Franchise tax, regulatory licensing. The regulatory licensing would be innkeeper's tax and airport parking, not airport parking, parking tax. Golf course at $737. Increase in admin fees, judgment levy, parking meters, police overtime, and airport fire reimbursement. The last two slides are just for your enjoyment. I've given these to you a couple of times pertaining to property tax values. We've added the 2016 property tax values, and these are in your districts for residential versus commercial properties.
Okay, any questions? Andrew?
This might be a lot outside the scope of what we're talking about, but I'm also interested in hearing about the impact of the impact fee moratorium on the number of permits and the cascading effect on the budget long-term. And it might take a couple of years to get there to see what the impact was. Is that on our radar at this point?
It is on our radar as well. Yes, it's one of the things that, so permit revenue came in well, or was coming in well. So we are starting April projections right now, and obviously we still had permits. The moratorium lasted till April 20th. But it is on our radar to see how much the permits decrease and the revenue will decrease as well.
Well, because one of the theories was if you were to sacrifice some pennies for a lot of dollars later on, meaning we don't charge a lot of impact fees and you stimulate a lot of growth and permit action and building, you'd see a dramatic increase in the net, maybe delayed for a couple of years, but definitely coming in. And it'd be nice to see if that's actually true for us as a body going forward about how do you use it effectively to stimulate the economy.
Right. That's a great idea.
Okay, other questions for Mary Beth? All right, thank you.
Let me do yours.
All right, now we'll hear about the budget.
Maybe if I can figure out how
Maybe.
to make this
Flip over.
broadcast up there. All right, so thanks for the opportunity to be here and to be able to present some of the expense side portions of the budget. I look forward to being able to be here with you as we go through this in a more in-depth review over the next couple of weeks. And so I'm going to just give you a few overviews to be able to do that. Just a quick reminder of some of the timelines associated with us as we prepare the budgets. Some of the departments, mostly the airport and public utilities, begin the budget process as early as November, beginning to prepare the budget for each new fiscal year. The general fund budget work begins in January. We start with revenues, go through the projections that Mary Beth has just gone over with you. Then we work towards the expense side, and then finalized by being able to balance the budget. It's a long process. It requires a lot of different hours, and it's not just a process that I do alone, so I want to thank all of those that help and participate with that. It's across all of the departments and throughout the city, people who come and support and help prepare this balanced budget. So, next. So as we move from the revenue that Mary Beth just talked about, you can see that there was a lot of positive associated with the revenues. But this was really needed because, as you remember, in FY 2017, we had a large portion of the budget that was funded through one-time revenues. So the increases in revenues that we're seeing, we're able to cover a lot of those one-time revenues that we used last fiscal year, or during the current fiscal year. So in spite of those increased revenues, as we prepared the budget, we asked each of the departments to come forward with their top 3 initiatives for the budget, to bring those, but to also come with how they would fund each of those initiatives from within their own budgets, to kind of give us an idea of what are some of the cuts that might be able to take place, as well as those things that were needed. As departments brought forward their initiatives, those initiatives totaled over $10 million.
Still not working.
I don't know what I did.
Council members, do you have your
It's working now.
staff packet in front of you?
There we go.
Okay. Okay, good.
Go to the
So,
next.
I was
Next
gonna
slide.
say, you
So
can
slide
move
number
forward.
3. As you can see, the overall proposed budget is $1.64 billion. That is billion with a B. A large portion of that obviously comes from the airport, and especially from the airport terminal redevelopment program. So just a reminder of that program, and that is included in the total numbers as you look at those from a citywide perspective. The TRP budget increased by $528 million. Public utilities also had some larger increases due to some infrastructure projects that they have going, and those are close to $12 million. But the general fund itself also increased by approximately $12 million. Going to the next slide, as we focus specifically on the general fund, let's talk a little bit about what that is, and we'll do that throughout the next few slides. The general fund has an increase of approximately, of 40 FTEs over the last fiscal year. So from FY17 to FY18, there are 40 additional FTEs. 18 of those were FTEs that were funded in budget amendment during this current fiscal year, 10 of which were police officer positions that were unfunded positions, but allowed them to be able to meet staffing needs within the police department. Within the current budget, there's a few positions that are associated with revenues. You saw in Mary Beth's presentation that there's an increase from the airport. That will cover staffing of 3 additional firefighters to staff a fire engine at the airport. There were 3 non-emergent dispatchers added to be able to cover some of the call issues within the dispatch center. Those are associated with revenues from the 911 fees. And there's also an engineer that is being paid through project allocation to other areas. 6 of the additional FTEs are also covered from within Public Services Department themselves. So what they are doing is taking some of the funds that they currently have to pay for outside plumbers or different things like that, and reallocating those funds to personnel, to city employees. 5 of the FTEs are also associated with Rose Park Golf Course, moving to the general fund. As you can see from the graph here, the proposed budget is very similar to what it was in FY 2017. We'll talk briefly about compensation. Perhaps we'll cover a little bit of some of the questions that Councilmember Rogers posed. Compensation is the biggest piece of the general fund budget. The city will see a 3.5% increase in the cost of health insurance premiums this year. That's a cost of nearly $600,000 to the general fund and approximately $1 million total. The mayor's proposal also includes the continued contribution of 1/2 of the deductible for the city-offered HSA. That's $1,500 for family and $750 for single coverage. The budget proposed is going to honor all current negotiated increases for union employees. So those are the represented employees that you referenced earlier, Councilmember Rogers. It also sets aside funding to cover those represented employees who are not going to see one of those step increases as negotiated by the unions at a 1% increase. It includes an increase for all non-represented employees, so those that are not within one of the unions. And that will that increase will be based on whether a person is above or at market or below market.
Cindy, do you have a clarifying question?
John, will you help us back up just a little bit on the union raises that are budgeted for? You said all currently negotiated, and the city hasn't concluded the negotiations for this year. So is this what the administration is proposing to the unions, or is it what was negotiated in another year? I guess I should look at Patrick
Yes.
too. So just to clarify for the record, we know that negotiations are usually not done by now.
Right, so this is, I think what John is referring to is what was previously negotiated. So the step increases the unions negotiated at a prior time that are due this year. And those folks, we're proposing those individuals who are not, sorry, Julio, are not due those step increases that were negotiated before would get a 1%, and that 1% is part of the ongoing conversation with the unions.
I found the information I think you were asking for, Councilman.
Okay.
So depending on the union and the job series, as Cindy mentioned, prior negotiations have outlined a certain pay frequency or pay increase frequency. So for instance, if you are an AFSCME employee in a job series 1, you have an entry rate that you receive when you start working. And then at year 1, you get a 12.5% increase. And then year 2, you don't get an increase. In year 3, you get a 15.8% increase. And then you top out. So for AFSCME job series 100 employees, they top out at 3 years. For 200 employees, they top out at 8 years, and they have different increases associated with the different years. They start at the entry rate, year 1, 4, 6, and 8. And so again, it varies based on union and based on job series. But what we've realized is that depending on the step, some of these folks are getting an increase anywhere from 6% up to 18%, depending on what year they're moving into. And so if they're scheduled to already get one of those step increases, what we're saying is that they wouldn't also get the 1% that they would get if they're not getting one of the step increases. Does that make sense?
So I guess my follow-up question is, for the step increase, like you show here, for 1% for union employees not scheduled to receive a step increase, they get a 1% increase, correct? But the step increase, is that just one-time money for 1 year, or is that, I'm getting no's, that is just, that's their salary is bumped
It'll be
up to that
built in.
next step?
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you. Julio, I just want to thank you for making sure that you had all the information you needed, instead of just trying to shoot from the hip.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions on that piece of the salary, the union piece?
Any questions, comments from the council?
Okay, so for those that are not part of a bargaining unit, there's a base pay increase. That base pay increase is either a 1% for those that are currently at or above market, and a 2% increase for those that are below market, trying to move those employees up to the market level. Questions on that? Okay. The budget, we're going to talk next about 3 of the major things that are included in the budget. The first piece will be the homeless services budget. What we have done for homeless services is we've taken the budgets that were in lots of different departments and consolidated those budgets into the community and neighborhood development department. That department will now oversee that through the hand division, and especially under the direction of the Homeless Services Outreach Coordinator that was funded in Budget Amendment number 2. That person will be in charge of coordinating all of the homeless activities. Obviously, they're not going to take care of all of those. A lot of the costs are still going to remain within some of the other departments. Police department will still be covering the police aspect of that. Fire will cover the emergency response aspect. Public services will also cover some of the public service needs, the cleanup and some of those other things through their current employees. And so they do have portions within their budget, but those are really personnel costs that are associated within each of those departments. So what we hope to do with this is be able to have one point of contact who can be able to look at all of the different needs and requests and be able to better utilize city resources in fulfilling those, as well as our outside partners, the Clean Team and the Green Team and other associated people. Okay, next, one of the bigger pieces is moving Rose Park Golf Course from the golf fund itself into the general fund, creating the Rose Park Community Golf Course. This is hoping to accomplish a number of different things. One, it serves to strengthen the golf fund. It doesn't fix all of the problems that the golf fund has, but it serves to strengthen it and position it to where we can move forward and have some more in-depth conversations about how we fix golf fund in and of itself. Two, it recognizes golf as a viable community recreation option. Just similar to all of the other recreational options that we provide throughout the city, it recognizes that golf is one of those options. Three, it protects green space and open space. And lastly, it provides an opportunity for the city to look at further options for the Rose Park Golf Course and the associated property of the golf course. Questions?
Questions about this? I know we're going to be talking about golf later on in this meeting. Just to let everyone know that what we're thinking about doing with that discussion is to have more of a 50,000 foot level discussion about golf and the mayor's vision, the administration's vision, not only for Rose Park but for the golf fund in general. And then we would be scheduling the specific golf budget to be discussed next week. So today's would just be the 50,000 foot level. Next week we'd get into the details on stuff. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Lastly, just a quick glimpse of the capital improvement projects. As you can see from the slide, the amount of capital improvements over the next 4 fiscal years really is constrained based on the amount of debt service that the CIP projects are paying. We saw that rise up in the current fiscal year, in fiscal year 2017, and that will remain through fiscal year 2021, at which time there'll be a little bit more money that is then free to use for pay-as-you-go projects and other things. Because the CIP is very constrained, one of the things that the mayor did with the CIP this year was she went and looked at old CIP projects that had either little or no work done on them and looked to recapture and reallocate some of those funds. And in this budget, you'll see $1.9 million of those previous projects that were funded that have now been reallocated to projects.
I would actually, Mr. Chair, like to see a list of those CIP projects that had the money taken away from them. So I'd like to make that request.
And we can provide that information to you.
Great.
I actually would as well, and I think that I'd be interested not only seeing what projects money is being taken from, but also where exactly and how that money is going to be spent, and which area of the CIP it's going to be moved to.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I know this is a general overview and I'm asking a specific question, but it's my understanding that over the past number of years, we have allocated about $11 million for infrastructure and streets, most specifically. And in the current budget, the proposal is for $8 million. Patrick, do you know why the decrease when we need about $36 million to stay on top of the streets, literally on top of the streets so they don't crumble? Do you know why the reduction there?
I don't know the answer to that, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Cindy, do you want to, I know that Cindy can clarify, because she and I had this discussion earlier. So.
Right. So I just double checked. We do have, our staff is sending questions to the administration, as we always do, to get quick answers from them so that we can include that in our staff report. So we do have the information of where they are recommending that the money that was recaptured would be spent. We have that piece of information, and Ben was putting it in his staff report, but we'll get that out to you right away. What we don't have is the information that we requested last week on where the funding that was recaptured, where that was recaptured from. And so we probably need that.
I have that. I can give it to you.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions about CIP?
Other questions about the budget?
Other questions about anything? Well, the budget, I guess. Won't say anything, but. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. So the next item on our agenda is number 6, the council staff overview of the mayor's recommended budget fiscal year 2017-2018. Jennifer Bruno is our council office deputy director and will be walking us through this. So Jennifer, welcome and thank you.
Thanks. And I'll do my best not to repeat all of the things that have been said, because I think the administration did a good job kind of giving an overview. I think what the council staff overview tries to do is tie it more closely with how it relates to current council priorities and other areas of council member interest, and then also just how it relates to constituents in general, since you guys often get questions from constituents about what will this change mean to me. So as Mary Beth reviewed, there's a sort of robust revenue picture. They're projecting a 5% growth in sales tax and almost $6 million growth in property tax revenue. That has a few different components that all affect taxpayers slightly differently. 1 million of that is the judgment levy, which is a 1-year, one-time property tax increase, and it's a way for the city to pay ourselves back for taxes that were essentially protested in the previous year. So it is a tax increase, and it does require a truth in taxation hearing, and that has its own extensive noticing requirements that we'll comply with if the council agrees to keep that in the budget. But just to note that. The administration is also proposing a property tax stabilization, which is a mechanism that we've actually used a couple of times over the last couple years, where we set the budget based on the actual revenues that were received the prior year rather than the budgeted revenues that were received the prior year. And it's a distinction that sounds small, but sometimes it can be quite large. In this case, we received about $4.5 million more in revenue from property taxes than we budgeted. And if we had just sort of strictly followed our state code with regard to property taxes, the city would never keep that money going forward. That would essentially be one-time money that we would lose, and then our budget would sort of naturally go back to the budget from the previous year. Doing property tax stabilization allows the city to kind of keep pace with that growth as it comes in.
Jennifer? The judgment levy, I'm trying to remember, I know that we have done them in the past, and I am trying to remember the consistency or the historic context for using the judgment levy.
We've done them almost every year that I can recall. I don't know if Cindy has a much longer memory than I do, but we've always done them typically because it's actual money that was due to the city that was just not paid because of a judgment. Essentially, a taxpayer went through the appeals process and made the case that the property was worth less money. In many cases, it's centrally assessed properties. So like Verizon would go to the state tax commission and argue for a 10% reduction in their facilities across the state. And that would mean that our budget would be shorted by that money in that current fiscal year. Doing a judgment levy allows us to sort of go back and at least pay ourselves back for the money that we were shorted in that current fiscal year. So it's a practice that we've done. It's not mandated, obviously, by state law, but it's a feature in the property tax code that allows us to get that money back.
And is it predictable? If we looked at that levy cost over years, does it increase with? I guess I'm looking for all of these predictable ties, but if we instead anticipated that much less,
it's been varied amounts year to year. But
The problem with the predictability is because most of these are judgments and they could go back to like 1972. So say it's a Verizon, they believe that their value is undervalued. It can sit there for 30 years and finally go to a judge and be ruled on 30 years later. I tried to do it probably 10 or 15 years ago, and there's no predictability to it because I don't know when a judge is going to see those or hear those in order for us to know when that judgment levy is going to occur.
that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so it makes sense that we would go with this course as opposed to anticipating a predictable amount of reduction in our actual revenue,
Correct.
because it is not predictable. Thank you for
Can
helping me
clarify,
understand.
Mary Beth, before you go? Is our actual revenue reduced because of the appeals?
That's correct. So the
Okay.
judgment actually, when the judgment came in, we're using XYZ company, centrally assessed XYZ company. Judgment comes in, they don't have to pay those taxes, or in some cases, we actually give them money back, which we have done before too in years. We've given them property taxes that we've collected back to that company because it could go back from 1978 to 1999. It can go 11 years, 12 years, 13 years, and so we have to pay them for all those back taxes, and
And
that has
that
happened
comes
too.
out of the judgment levy or out of governmental immunity?
Comes out of property tax.
Really?
Comes
But
out
the
directly
city's-
out of your property tax.
But the city's reimbursed through through the
Judgment
judgment levy.
The
Judgment
next
levy.
year, correct.
Huh.
So there's the only tiny bit of predictability is that you've been pretty close in your estimate that you make when you submit the mayor's recommended budget information and what is actually given to the city in the numbers that we get approximately June 8th.
Correct. And the reason we do that is because we know what judgments have been received as of November, and then we say, okay, what do we think is going to occur between November and June 8th? And then we put some predictability in that. But I can't tell you that there's going to be a large settlement come through in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 10 years, based on the company. Because I would say the last time I looked at it, probably 80% of them don't come to fruition at all.
I appreciate this because to look at it at first glance, it seems like responsible budgeting would acknowledge that there's this consistent lack of payment or successful appeals process that happens, and so we therefore should account for X percentage less in our cash on hand when we do our budgeting. And so I really appreciate the context of the fluidity of this number, and that the judgment levy is probably our best option to deal with that. So
In addition to the judgment levy, there's also another feature, and this is probably getting way into the weeds, but another feature in the property tax calculation where the rate is actually set assuming that a certain percentage of taxpayers just won't pay their taxes. And so that's a separate thing where when we set the certified tax rate, it accounts for that 5-year actual. So it's actually based on the rolling average of what Salt Lake City taxpayers do. Usually it's in the 95%.
I think I
people.
remembered that, and that's why I wondered why
Yeah.
weren't we using something
Yeah,
like
it's
that
it's like
here?
two variations on slightly variations on the same problem of people not paying.
Yep.
Who will generate a new property taxes, and we can do this in part because the formula for setting the state property tax or the certified tax rate has been changed. So I think me and Mary Beth are both hopeful that it will pan out this year, that the formula will do what we think it intends to do. But we'll know for sure on June 8th. And that's when I'll probably write an email to the council and let you know if that number is good and we're good to go forward, or if that number is a little higher than we anticipated, and then we need to go in and rebalance the budget, which none of us want to do, or if maybe the number is even higher than the administration proposed, and then we can, the council can prioritize how to spend that money. So that's a placeholder essentially for now until June 8th. Some of the other revenue items that the administration's proposing are that CPI adjustment, and that's something that the council passed by ordinance a couple of years ago that allows the city to keep pace with the cost of doing business. So all the fees that are charged to people that do business with the city. It's an automatic percentage calculation based on the consumer price index. So this year it's 2.1%. Some of the other funds that are proposing increases are a water rate increase of 5%, a sewer rate increase of 30% to pay for some of the improvements that are required now by the federal government. We've discussed those, and I think we'll keep discussing those. There's a proposed increase in the library property tax rate to pay for operations at the 2 new branch libraries. Some of the highlights relating to council priorities are the consolidating of $1.8 million in expenses that have previously been spread across the city to address homeless services. And quite a few of those actually were added by the council mid-year to address some of the emergency winter housing needs in the Rio Grande area. Those are proposed to be ongoing on a sort of ongoing basis, and will be centralized through the city's homeless services coordinator.
And the toilets on wheels.
And the toilets, indeed. The council also funded in a budget amendment this year an increase for the city's payroll system to better track where city employees' time is spent, specifically public safety employees. And I think in the long run, when the city is telling its story to the legislature, we'll be able to more accurately say what is the true cost of hosting these facilities in your city. And so that's a benefit we'll hopefully see in the coming years. There are some other adjustments that may need to be made to other departments as time goes on, because some of those costs that were taken out of, for example, public services, they might discover that they still have some need for budget in those areas. And so they've committed to reporting back to the council on that.
May I mention that there's one area in particular where we already know there could be a shortfall with the transfer of funds, and it's a fairly substantial amount. And so you'll see that in our public services staff report. It's a little unusual to have a situation where you are going into a budget knowing that you don't have a full year's funding in an area. So we will be suggesting in that budget that you look to the administration to identify a funding source so that complete funds are appropriated for or available for appropriation for the full year of service. The only time you would not do a full year of service is funds for a full year of service is if you weren't planning to provide that service for the full year. So that's one area. It's not huge, but it's an area that we'll be coming back to you on in our staff report with more detail. Is that a fair way to say it, Jennifer?
Yep, and public services is scheduled for next week's council meeting. Housing, there is an additional $3 million that the mayor's proposed via the redevelopment agency, specifically the Central Business District, to contribute to the affordable housing pot of money that whose use is to be determined, but soon. For infrastructure, the proposed budget is essentially flat, about 6.5% or 7%, depending on how you calculate CIP. The goal in previous years had been 9%. I think we've only come close once. At 8.5%. We usually hit about 7%. It's just a rule of thumb kind of measure where you ensure that you're investing in your capital improvements on a sort of fairly regular basis. That said, there are some funds proposed in the budget for a CIP plan to map out those needs over the next 10 years. And the council should also be receiving the results of a pavement management study later in the summer, which I think will tell the true cost and needs of the streets as they are right now, as opposed to the current data we have, which is actually based on 5-year-old data that's just been extrapolated forward with certain assumptions that may or may not be borne out by what actually happens. In economic development, the administration's proposing to add a workforce development manager to better connect workers with businesses who need them. And they're proposing to continue the funds and the FTE that the council added mid-year to continue to grow that department and its completion of the strategic plan. Some of the other expense items that the council might be interested in is that this year's budget actually balances the budget with less one-time money than in previous years, so we celebrate that. It's $4.8 million compared to the $7.3 million last year. This is just a metric that we check in with because, you know, ideally you have ongoing expenses paid for by ongoing revenues. The reality, of course, is that, you know, you have to balance it somehow, and so we always need a few one-time sources, and so we sort of track the trajectory of that year to year. There's also some FTEs elsewhere in the budget that constituents may notice in terms of service delivery. 3 non-emergency 911 operators to help streamline the non-emergency call taking at the dispatch center, and 3 firefighters at the airport to ensure full staffing for the new engine that will be required to service the new terminal. This is so that the fire department can fully staff that engine. Those FTEs are paid for by airport funds, so it's the FTEs show up in the general fund staffing document but are offset by airport revenues. And then an engineer in community and neighborhoods to help deliver CIP projects more quickly. The big story that was mentioned earlier is transferring Rose Park revenues as well as expenses to the general fund. It's a net cost of approximately $400,000 to the general fund, and there are many benefits that the administration went over in terms of recognizing it as a community asset. I think to the Vice Chair's point, we'll talk about that more later in the golf discussion. And just in general, the high deductible health plan, just wanted to note the effect that switching to the high deductible health plan has had on the city's budget year to year. It has meant that the city's been able to manage much more predictably its costs because such a large portion of the budget is people. The increase of 3.5% in premiums this year is a lot lower than a lot of other businesses are seeing, and so I think that's helped the city balance the budget for sure. And then fleet replacement is essentially flat, although the council has noted in the past that this is one of those sort of perennial budget needs that we just don't have enough money to address. So that's the story.
Okay. Questions for Jennifer?
Can I just compliment
Yes.
Jennifer and our staff that you shine in budget time? This is an awesome abbreviated version of the changes that we're looking at. I appreciate the concise nature of it. It's a really, this is how we eat an elephant, and today we take our first bite. So thanks for this great document. I think we'll be using it for the next month and a half.
Thanks, Aaron. I concur with that. They're great. So, other comments or compliments? All right. Seeing none, what we can do right now, is IMS here? I know that they were planning on coming at a little bit early. Okay, they are here. So, sorry. Let's go ahead and move forward with our presentation from IMS. So we're going to jump past the break because we started a little bit later. We'll move ahead of the golf discussion because we're waiting for Mayor Biskupski to come from a previous meeting. And we'll hear from IMS right now, which is item number 9 on our agenda. After IMS, we will take a short 10-minute break and then come back and have the golf discussion. So I'd like to welcome Lehua Weaver, our Associate Deputy Director from the Council Office. And if anyone from IMS would like to join Lehua at the table, we would invite you now.
If I can't handle a particular question, I'll call one of my division directors up. But anyway, thank you so much. Very nice to see you all again. And thank you for the opportunity to cover, explain, and answer whatever questions you have about the mayor's budget recommendation for IMS. The mayor recommended a nearly 5% or $650,000 increase year to year for IMS, largely to cover 2 major projects. Both of them very important, even critical to government operations and the delivery of government services. One of them a constituent relation management system, the other a replacement document management system. They'll both provide or deliver modern, up-to-date capabilities to critical government services. I've read the council budget staff report, and compliments to Lehua for doing a really great job with that. And I hope I can answer any questions that you have.
Great. Any questions about the IMS budget? Or comments? Or compliments, Aaron?
I'll hold the compliment. Okay,
Okay.
go ahead, James.
Well, I heard you say the mayor recommended this. What that's not in this recommendation is something that you would like to see?
When I spoke to the mayor and the mayor's office staff, I had highlighted some accelerated spending for security concerns that I had, and recognizing the evolution of where security needs to go in the city and the competition for resources. I support the mayor's decision to defer a recommendation on accelerated spending for that, because we have a lot of basic administrative reforms that we need to do in the department and across the city that don't require additional spending. They just require a change in how we're doing certain things and the completion of work tasks that are underway already in this fiscal year. I think that will keep us very well occupied and can bring our security posture up to a very improved point as we progress through the upcoming fiscal year. And to do that, we don't need to have additional funding.
Great.
Yep.
A follow-up question then is the constituent request system for $250,000. Is that to enhance the SLC mobile app that we currently have?
It's an extension in a sense, but it's envisioned to be a much more complete relationship management platform that will capture initially all requests and complaints from whatever channel they come in through. Right now, SLC Mobile or City Sourced manifests in the mobile app and a little bit on slc.gov. And that's for a digital channel delivery. As we discussed in our last meeting together, your experience with it. It satisfied an important need and does it very well, but it doesn't fulfill the expectations of what we want to see for visibility to assignments of the work tasks, to the status of progress. Essentially, it's a make your request and then eventually something will respond back to you. During that period, you have no visibility. And because it operates on the basis of some limited integrations with a small handful of back-end systems, and for others it depends on email messaging, we don't have a way to easily assemble where is a request in its life cycle, so that if escalation is needing, it's requiring a lot of correspondence, a lot of running around. This CRM will allow us to understand where every request is at any given time and provide visibility to whoever needs it, be that an internal manager or to the constituent themselves through an improvement either in the mobile interface or some other mechanism that we'll devise in the new platform.
And how long will it take for you to implement that?
I think it'll be implemented throughout the upcoming fiscal year. We have to establish the baseline platform and then all of the use cases for each request and complaint type that comes in, and then broker those workflows out to the back-end systems. It's a considerable job, and I expect it will progress throughout the year. I can't telegraph at this point because I don't have a project plan, and we haven't made a formal selection of which platform we will adopt. So I can't telegraph milestones right now for, say, a beta release and then limited cases as they add as we develop the platform out.
Well, thank you. It'll be a big improvement, hopefully.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up?
Sure, Aaron.
I was going to ask you to talk about the possible pros and cons of replacing City Source. I think you've let off there a little bit.
City Sourced will continue in its current role in the short term and possibly continue to live on in the middle and longer terms, depending on what the project team decides to do with that channel for receiving complaints and requests. It's a very good start, and I'm sensitive to disposing of good work in favor of an unknown. but we need to make it work as a satisfactory and fully functional front end to a real CRM, to provide the visibility to the requests as they are processing, to provide real valuable feedback to the requester. It doesn't do that today. So in the short term, I think that some modifications to city-sourced could be appropriate. But once the project team is formed and all of the roles on the team are assigned, I'll look to the project team to make the right recommendation on whether to replace it in the post-immediate term or continue with it and modify it to function properly with the CRM.
When you talk about the valuable feedback for the residents and people submitting, that sounds more like the role of our IMS or the responding employees, not so much the capability of CitySourced itself. Am I right in that way? Does CitySource currently allow us, if we had the staff time, to give more value-rich feedback?
Not that I'm aware of. It's a channel for the inbound complaint, and once completed, it will send a notification out. Anything that would be done in the course of the workflow to correspond back to the requester would have to be done on an exceptional basis. The CRM would be the collection point for all commenting and collaboration to resolve the request as it is in process. And we could provide a window into the CRM through CitySourced to give the requester visibility as that is unfolding.
So when James gets a response that says your complaint has been closed or something, as it did, without, that's a generic response you're telling me, or an auto-based response?
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
I have a bunch of questions, so I'll move faster than that.
Okay.
I appreciated Lehua's prompts around whether or not all of the city departments would be transitioning to the new document management system and what the potential costs are if we don't have that complete transition.
Right. So when we talk about costs, I'll just limit my perspective to financially measurable costs. And, you know, I'll start by saying the mayor has assembled a very strong team of professional managers that are super sensitive to efficiency and seamless operation across the government. All of them are committed to participating in and supporting enterprise solutions when those solutions are identified. Nobody is determined to operate independently. They all support the idea in concept and in reality when decisions are being made. With that in mind, I fully expect that all departments will participate in both systems, the CRM right out of the gate. The document management does present an opportunity for transition in two departments, one being airport, the other being public utilities. Those transitions, I expect the necessary work to be planned and the movement to be rapid to get to the point that we can decommission the systems that they are on today. If exceptions are necessary, they would only be done for operational and financial necessity. And when I say necessity, I'm serious about necessity, that there is no viable way for them to transition the operation onto the enterprise platform. But in the case of CRM and document management, those are difficult to envision right now, and I don't expect it to happen.
Aaron, if you don't mind, if I could jump in with some follow-up questions, mostly directed, actually I'm going to direct them towards Patrick because it's largely the same question that you just asked, but this is my 5th budget cycle since I've been on the council. In past budget cycles, we've funded similar requests. We've always had these, high ideas about how we want to, either different software or different programs and how we can, better communicate with our constituents. I'm very supportive of both the request for the constituent request systems and the document management system. But my question is very similar to what Aaron was asking, just about the implementation of it. It seems to me that the only way that this is going to function properly is if every department across, throughout the city uses this and uses the tool correctly. So the question to Patrick is, have you already been discussing with your department heads the importance of their participation in this? And are those the costs of their participation? Are those included in this budget, or when would we see that?
So let me answer the first question. Absolutely, those conversations started very early on, and Mr. Daly has been championing those conversations as we go forward. And as he said, the cabinet is aligned around the vision here and the shared commitment to making this work. And I think Mr. Daly, in his professional judgment, doesn't see why there's going to be too many hurdles there. But there are some unknowns that we need to get through first. So to the second question, maybe help me understand the costs.
Well, I just think that, there may be, do the amounts that we're seeing here, are those the costs for entire citywide implementation? Or are you seeing that some departments are going to have to come up with funding to comply with, or to pattern their systems after this?
I'd look to Greg to answer that. I think this is citywide costs here, although there obviously may be some things that we don't know that'll come up as we get into it.
Okay.
Yes, and I'd just like the opportunity to follow up on that at a later time, as I'm just not sure right now if we've accounted for the licensing needs of the airport.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then, Aaron, one more follow-up question. And it's actually more of a comment than a question, also directed to Patrick. The council office is we play a major role in a lot of the constituent requests that come through, a lot of the document management and document sharing that takes place. And I strongly encourage you and your staff to work closely with the council, with Cindy and the council staff, when rolling these systems out, to ensure that the council office is included step by step as things are moving forward, like your other departments, so that we don't have any hiccups, or that we're not having to go back and try to reinvent the wheel as things move forward.
Absolutely. And so we envision multiple channels all getting consolidated and into the CRM. We have the mobile channel. The new website, slc.gov, is being designed with a service orientation, and all of those services start with a request for service, which will be brokered through the CRM. Then we have phone call and walk-in traffic. Whoever is fielding phone calls or walk-in traffic, such as the council office, or through whatever other mechanism you have for gathering that input, we plan to train and enable the office to participate fully in the CRM and to receive the requests and to be able to track them through.
Chair, could I make a distinction
Cindy.
there? I think in using the term "as they roll this out," that would mean that the council would be involved once all of the decisions have been made about how to design the program. And typically on something like this, where we would be probably one of the heavier users, they in the past have included us in the discussions, or at least had somebody interview us or that type of a thing. So at this point, we have not had any input.
Okay, and I would encourage you to do that, because that was actually my
help.
intent.
I
So,
thought that's
yeah,
what you were
thank you.
asking.
No,
Yeah.
that
Yes,
exactly is my
and-
intent.
and where we-
Let me address that, Greg. I think that is the intent. We know you are a heavy user. I think the question before us is, are we going to get these projects funded before we take that next step? So.
Okay, Aaron.
Thanks. I have two more questions. Our staff report referred to, forgive me, the February meeting that we had where you gave us a good, now your feet are wet, here's where things are at, here's what you hope to do. But the thing that I was most excited about was not on the staff report bullet list, and that was in our discussion around the potential for a project that looks at quality of life across the city with metrics that we already collect in a GIS format. And I wondered if there might be a way that the council could support the progress of that project this year.
I think that is, that we can fulfill that without a funding request needed to make it reality.
That's even better. We can just ignore my question then. Okay, we'll move on. My last question is about the Acela increase to
Yes.
the contract. I wonder what the benefits are that we're receiving with that $88,000 increase. And I know that Acela has been a godsend in many ways, but do we keep analyzing who their competitors are and what the advantages are to this contract that we
Right.
carry?
The $88,000 increase is attributable to electronic plan review and project docs. It's not an Acela price increase. Acela is flat in the next fiscal year itself. The maintenance contract costs are not increasing at all. That is for project docs, increased usage and storage of the electronic plan review capability that is integrated and key to engineering's work. And that's what that reflects.
You're speaking a little bit of Greek to me.
Okay.
But what it sounds like you're saying is that we are using Acela more and storing more documents there. When I started on the council almost 4 years ago, I remember in an introductory briefing learning that we are still kind of, have the monkey in the basement, no offense to the monkey or whatever, scanning old things in, that this is a really annoying, long process to get everything electronic. Is that what is going on here? Or is there new work actually that this is accounted for?
I think this is new work that goes on in the routine course of permitting, and the plans that are submitted with them are digital and are stored in project docs. And the work method used in engineering for plan review uses project docs to pull those plans up, review them, and store them. And it's an accumulating pile of storage as they go through all of their permitting work in the course of the year. It is projected to grow the costs of that cloud-based service, which is integrated with Acela and is their workflow now, and it's a very effective workflow. The costs are growing. We expect, however, that if the funding for the document management project comes through, we will offload the long-term storage of old plans, work already completed, up on project docs and knock down that cost. But
So you're
that it
saying that we
remains to
could
be
see a future shift to general fund covering the cloud-based costs for storage of these project plans and documents? Is that what I'm hearing? That the cost could be shifted in the future out of IMS and more broadly shared across departments?
Well, because it's IMS, it is distributed across the using departments.
So
that
this
cost.
88,000 is distributed in the costs that are charged to the other departments?
For the IMS.
Everything IMS is.
Acela-based IMS
Gotcha.
services, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think the only other thing is if you could get me some information about what that increase looked like year over year and what you might anticipate in the future, I would appreciate that, but no rush.
Sure.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Aaron.
Welcome, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the real chair is here. And while he gets up to speed, I'll continue being the fake chair. Any other questions? Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, I know we're getting additional information about Rose Park Golf Course, but I'm just curious to know the $80,000 increase in your budget for IMS-related support. What is it that's specific to Rose Park that we would be doing that? Because I know we were doing an app and trying to have all those kinds of things, but I just am curious why it's specific to Rose Park.
I don't think it is specific to Rose Park. I think that it is a mechanism to pay down the IMS load that golf has to sustain. And it was, that was done by golf, and they labeled it as such, but it is not specific to Rose Park.
And so what, for golf, what service does IMS perform for them?
We provide maintenance of the end computing devices. And then golf is a general consumer of enterprise services for HR, for finance, and they get assigned costs commensurate with their usage of those services. They are a network user, they are a security services user, and they bear a distribution for that. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay, other questions or comments? Andrew?
This is a question more along the lines of how you see your role with the rest of the city departments as far as facing the public. So we think of IMS, I think sometimes we think that IMS is the way we face the public, and we should talk to you about how the public gets information from us or for us or works with us. Is that sort of how you're seeing your role, or is your role to facilitate that department to department across the city? So each of those should have their plans and their sort of strategies of how they engage the public with information or back and forth. Help me understand that a little bit from your perspective, from the administration, perhaps from Patrick.
I think that every department is facing an increasing pressure to deliver information through mobile technology. And IMS is the enabler of technology behind the message. I don't ever want to be or at least not at this point in my career, want to be the director of public utilities or public services or the communications director in the office of the mayor. But all of these departments that are public-facing, police and fire also, are very dependent on the technology and the information that comes through technology to address the public in an informed and educated manner to the satisfaction of their mission. So I work with all of them individually and collectively to deliver the solutions that let them fulfill their mission, not only for their internal operations, but for their public relations mission also. IMS does not normally have a direct interface person to person with the public, but we provide and are the driver behind slcgov.com, slc.gov, which is emerging now, mobile solutions, and the delivery of on-demand documents and information that may not necessarily require human intervention for delivery of programmed reports and visibility to data sets.
So maybe from Patrick's perspective of the administration, how do you see that changing or not changing in the future? Because part of your role now is having a new web interface, a website essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't do the content, but you do the platform, and that has a lot to do with how you interact with it. So
And also the general theme of the website in converting from what we know today, which is more of a static presentation of how the government is structured with occasional messaging of news flashes, to a very noticeable transition to a service orientation where we are hoping that we can redirect and even grow the constituents' engagement and interaction with the government using mobile and web-based technologies for doing that. That is led and in large measure delivered through IMS, but with considerable counsel of each of the departments that ultimately do deliver the services requested.
And we don't see that changing over time. I think they, as Mr. Daly said, are the enabler to help all the departments and agencies and offices interact with the public as they see fit.
Yeah, I'm fully supportive. I think it's one of the things that could change a lot of how we run as a city, our effective integration with the community as a whole, and that. So I just want to clarify, when we talk about things, we talk about, well, if my neighbor wants to get information from the city, how do they do that? What does it look like for them in the coming year with the website change, those kind of things. But inside the city, sometimes we see it as, well, I have a platform, and then everybody's up to their own devices to share or not share based on what they feel comfortable with, what they can do, technology-wise, those kind of things. And it'd be interesting to hear more of a coherent thought across the city departments, if there's a shared sort of minimum, maybe, of sort of engagement or information sharing, those kind of things. Or if the platform is truly shared across the entire city so you can easily access anything you need in the city. The second question, though, is security. I know ransomware right now is a huge topic, which is always a topic, but maybe not this big. Where do we stand right now in our security for this particular threat, but in general? I saw a quick update on your work from last year.
The threat that got such publicity over the weekend and continues into the work week here exploited older versions of Microsoft operating systems that have been out of support for quite some time. I'm happy to report that we don't have an inventory of machines that are on those older operating systems, so we were immune to it. That doesn't mean that we will be immune to the next attack that will exploit an as yet unknown or an unidentified hole. We patch our machines as patches are released. We try to keep all of our machines on on operating system and application versions that are still in support. We passed a major milestone with the upgrade of Acela version 8, which allowed us to uniformly go to Windows version 10 on all new computers being delivered, which has the latest security protections in it. I think that our posture is generally good, but our administrative practices are not, and that's what I was referring to earlier when Councilmember Mendenhall asked me about where we stood with that. We need to make some important changes, and there's work underway in prerequisite dependencies to make that happen, and we'll complete them by the end of the summer. We did get hit through the weekend by a different variant, which turned some of our desktop machines into spam robots, and that then resulted in us becoming blacklisted for the distribution of email. Essentially, once the machines were taken control of, they started generating thousands of emails per second and flooding the outbound email with a volume like that resulted in the mail relay services that exist in the internet in blocking slcgov.com and blacklisting us from delivering mail to them. We ended up with 5 accounts compromised, considering that we have more than 3,000 active accounts. That's not an unanticipated level of failure, 5 out of 3,000, but it could do a lot of damage. We ended up blacklisted on 95 mail relay sites. As of this meeting, we're cleared on all but 1 and are in the process of clearing that last one. We are going to publish a little note out to everybody that says, like, you really can't fall for this kind of stuff, even though it's low level, and it is low level, and we recover from it rather quickly. It does require considerable work in IMS to respond to it, to lock down accounts, and then to start getting ourselves unblacklisted. Some of it happens automatically, others we actually have to go to them and say, we're clean now, will you please unblock us? And the visibility comes in that we get bounced emails. Maybe the council office was seeing it. I know the mayor's office was seeing it, that we were sending sensitive correspondence and it was bouncing and they didn't know why. And it's a direct result of people clicking on spam links that turned their machines into spam bots.
Well, usually the absence of anything bad is a good sign for you. I hate to sort of lower the bar, but the less we hear about you, the better job you're probably doing in a lot of ways. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any additional comments or questions? That looks like it's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. We'll now just take a quick break before we move on to our next agenda items. So let's do 15 minutes if we could. So if we're back here at 1:45, that'd be great. Thank you.
To walk in and all of a sudden.
break. We're going on to item number 8 in our agenda, which is a proposed Golf Enterprise Fund budget. We are joined at the table by Patrick and the mayor, and
I'm Matt Kameyer. I'm the
thank you
Associate
very
Director
much
for Golf.
Thank you. So, Mayor, I think you wanted to start off with just sort of an overview.
yeah.
So let's do that. Our staff member on golf is Allison, but we may get to her based on some questions. I do want to start off by saying that our thoughts and wishes go out to Dan Dent and his family. He had a family emergency, and we will be continuing our golf conversation. So, council members, today's truly about getting your questions out there, sort of big level things. We'll be coming back to this with a specific follow-up to the budget items, but please don't hesitate to ask questions today. Thank you,
Right.
Mayor.
Thank you, and I want to thank the individuals sitting behind me who took time out of their busy day to be here and hear this discussion. I greatly appreciate that. And thank you to all of you for providing me with a few minutes of time to speak directly with you on my proposal to move the Rose Park Golf Course from the Golf Enterprise Fund to the general fund this coming fiscal year. I understand this proposal may represent a shift in policy for members of the council. However, I believe after careful consideration, you will find this proposal is in line with the philosophy of our city to provide robust recreation activities for residents and visitors, promote open space, and to do all we can to protect assets valuable to the community. Last Friday, I had a wonderful time joining the Greater Avenues Community Council and residents from the Ensign Peak neighborhood as we opened the renovated 11th Avenue tennis and pickleball courts. The city invested nearly $850,000 upgrading the tennis courts and adding new pickleball courts, which will undoubtedly be used by players all around the valley. I will admit this was the first time I ever played pickleball, and now I have to get my son a racket, but it'll be fun. And I can see why it's a growing sport. Next week, I will join residents and staff at the new 900 South Bike Park for the kickoff of the Mayor's Bike to Work Day. This unique dirt bike recreation area in the heart of the city, complete with a pump track and multiple jumps, is connected to downtown and the west side of our city by off-street and on-street bike lanes, making it the perfect place for the young and the young at heart to show off their skills on two wheels. Each of these spaces has been championed by members of our community and provides those that will use them with high-quality facilities worthy of the capital city. With pickleball courts, playgrounds, trail systems, golf courses, and more, Salt Lake City has a very proud history of investing in recreational opportunities for our residents and visitors to enjoy. Like any neighborhood playground or park, Rose Park Golf Course is beloved by the surrounding community. This is where neighborhood idols like Tony Finau were born and where young people chase their legacies. Rose Park Golf Course is home to Guadalupe School's First Tee program, a collaboration between the course's course's golf pros and the school. This program teaches skills and creates a unique opportunity for some of the most economically challenged kids in our city. The First Tee program has brought programming to almost 350 students at Guadalupe School, and the Rose Park Golf Pros are working to expand this program to reach even more kids. Rose Park Golf Course is also one of only a handful of courses in the country which participates in the Links to Freedom program. By partnering with the VA, the team at the Rose Park Golf Course helps injured service members heal their wounds and work to restore emotional, physical, and social well-being. This year, 30 veterans have enrolled in the 8-week clinic. These community programs are on top of the day-to-day recreation the golf course provides to the surrounding community, including providing space for the West High School women's golf team. More than any other course, Rose Park is truly a home course to the surrounding neighborhood. My budget proposal will help protect and expand this valuable community asset. While golf will always remain the anchor, by moving Rose Park into the general fund, our Parks Department has the opportunity to expand non-golf activities on the land while helping to support programs like First Tee and Links to Freedom. Our goal is to find a new path forward for the golf course by opening it up to additional recreation activities and aligning it with neighboring facilities like the Regional Athletic Complex facility and the disc golf course, both already supported by the general fund. By viewing the course more as a community recreation asset and less like a revenue-producing business, we can also open the game of golf to more residents. Several council members have suggested lower fees for residents. This is something we could do if recreation is truly the top priority. We also know the land Rose Park Golf Course sits on must remain forever protected and open. With critical sewer infrastructure crisscrossing the course, this land cannot be developed, something our Public Utilities Department has made very clear to all of us. The discussion on what to do with the golf in Salt Lake City is not a new one. I know it has been contentious and frustrating at times, but we have a shared responsibility to find a path forward for these 1,000 acres of open space worth over $100 million. While the proposal for Rose Park Golf Course won't solve all the problems facing Golf Enterprise Fund, it is an innovative way to make progress. With the proper support, we can link the golf course, Regional Athletic Complex, Jordan River Trails, disc golf, and additional space into a northwest recreation area. This can be a pilot for other courses in our city as well, but we need to start somewhere, and this community asset is the perfect place. Golf, like mountain biking, trail running, or pickleball, are activities many of our residents love. Let's work together to ensure we provide the recreational activities our residents enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Do you have any additional comments from yourself or your staff? Or should we just open it up?
No, we really are ready to just answer
Okay.
some questions, but thank you.
Great. Council members, comments, questions? Did I hear somebody over here? Aaron?
Well, I appreciate you being here, Mayor, and giving us some context to the budget proposal. And I guess I'm wanting to keep at the level that we intend to today, and I know that this is an ongoing discussion. But I'm curious about the operating deficit from fiscal year 17 that's over $850,000, and what is your proposal for us to address that deficit?
For the enterprise fund itself?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we created, and I know Dan went over some of the options. I think for us as a team, we have to actually figure out really how we will give them economic development tools, because a lot of very good ideas have come forward and been shut down. And those who work in the golf industry have been at my doorstep multiple times and from various parts of our community to say there are some very viable paths forward for creating a much stronger golf enterprise fund. We just aren't finding the support we need. And I think it takes maybe a second look at some of these ideas and some other possibilities. Like at the Rose Park Golf Course is a prime example. There's a couple buildings that are on that golf course that really, if we decided to put this into the general fund and develop those two pieces, those two parcels on the course to bring a place where you can rent bikes, or another place where there's food along the Jordan River Trail that people could stop at and eat, those create some revenue generating opportunities. And it's ideas like that that are really possible if we are open to them.
Yeah, I appreciate the contemplation of other forms of recreation being incorporated to this open space. But I don't think from the years of research we've done into what the actual revenue would be, not to mention the capital costs for the upgrades in order for there to be such a facility, or the kind of partnerships that and investments that would require, that would fill the kind of, $1.2 million cumulative FY 17-18 gap that we're looking at. So as we deal with the budget in the next 4 or 5 weeks, how do you propose that we address this existing deficit?
Well, I think we have to be mindful that if you just turn it into park space, then we still have to fund it completely, the maintenance and the operations and the upkeep of it entirely. The beauty of having golf is that it does bring revenue into our budget. And I think that speaks volumes about how we maintain all this open space in our community. Let's make this open space multi-purpose and allow for that golf fund enterprise to help pay for it. Because at the end of the day, we don't have a strategy on how to keep all this open space going without golf.
So how would we, in Rose Park specifically, in the 1,000 acres that are there, how would we allow for, let's say, biking to happen? Would it be a reduction in golf area to allow for mountain bike access through there, or would it be use of the existing Jordan River Parkway?
Right.
And in that vein, why it seems as though we could maintain golf at Rose Park within the Golf Enterprise Fund and complement the possible revenue streams of, let's say, bike rentals or community space in buildings, which wouldn't actually change the golf structure without transferring it to the golf fund. Why wouldn't the enterprise fund take this on?
I'm trying to envision the space differently as a Northwest recreation center where there's true connectivity and people are drawn into that area who maybe aren't drawn into it naturally because there isn't that real recreation drive. You have the regional area complex out there, athletic complex out there, and it's kind of its own thing. And the disc golf course is its own thing. The disc golf course is one of the best known courses in the country, but nobody even knows that. And if we bring it into the fold of a recreation center, the disc golf course players have some space that they feel like they could give up to maybe being part of more of a nature experience for the community. There are projects along the Jordan River that can get done that are part of nature in the city kind of concept that could get done in this trade if we work with public utilities on the potential of even purchasing to hold into their bailiwick the back nine of Rose Park Golf Course, for instance. So there's a lot of options that could happen that create opportunity for us. And what we have seen consistently is ideas coming forward through the Golf Enterprise that just get shut down. And what I'm trying to say is, let's create one very big park system where there's golf involved, but so are other things happening in that space.
I want to just get some clarity on a couple things. It's the the disc golf is actually at the former Jordan River Par 3,
Yes.
not at Rose Park Golf Course.
No,
But-
right, that's correct. And we would connect them.
And you mentioned the back nine at Rose Park Golf Course, though, as potential collaboration with public utilities and nature in the city. So are we actually looking at some decommissioning, so to speak, of current golf property for other uses?
No, but there is real opportunity to create access through there. So similar to what you see at Glendale, where Glendale is operating fully, and yet there's complete access through the course if you're on your bicycle, for instance, or you're walking as a pedestrian. It's similar in nature, only what we're trying to say is, let's create a system, a park system that helps us move in the direction that you, particularly as a council member, would like to see, and that is more opportunity that is nature-driven in that space. And that's what I envision as well, and I think we can get there.
I guess and this isn't the day, but I would love to see that proposal of how you would like to even hypothetically connect, let's say, that back nine area in a new way to the Jordan River Parkway, or what that looks like. Because part of the difficulty I have with the transition to the general fund, although I really do appreciate and agree with this broadened recreation concept, and the maintenance of the open space as open space, truly, is that without changing really the nature of that 1,000 acres as access for parks. If my kids and I, we get on our bikes, I've got the backpack with sandwiches in it, we can't actually pull over and have a picnic on the golf course. The 1,000 acres is still golf course. That it isn't park space. And I'm trying to work together here, because I do appreciate that you have found opportunities for strengthening community engagement in the area and bringing people to nature in a new way than we currently are. But the 1,000 acres is still golf, and I still can't get off my bike and throw the Frisbee with the kids.
Well, what we are suggesting, though, is that there would be space for you to have a picnic there, should we reconfigure some of those parcels.
With the Jordan River Par 3
we wouldn't lose
connection.
any of the golf course.
But that Jordan River Par 3 segment that is currently disc golf,
right,
is, I guess I feel as though that is being conflated with the Rose Park property, the golf course property, and making up for the community space without actually really touching the golf course whatsoever. And I think this is, I'm beating a dead horse here. We all understand that that's what the proposal is, but that's where I'm at. With 1,000 acres still being maintained without public unpaid access, that's not a park, that's a golf course.
Right, and like I said in my initial thing, though, if we really do move in this direction, then we could offer, right, public space for free, right? Like, or decreased rates or whatever it is.
We could go ahead and change the nature of the former Jordan River Par 3 course in this budget process and open it up for parks access without shifting the 1,000 acres from the enterprise to the general fund, and still accomplish those potential community, broad and recreation engagement opportunities. That's something we could still achieve if the goal is to engage people in nature. But the reason, that we're all having this discussion is because we still have $1.2 million that we don't know how we're going to pay for from FY17 and 18. And we will have another, who knows, $800,000 in the coming year. We're not creating revenue here.
Well,
we're creating nature engagement opportunities.
Right. But we're also pulling out of the Gulf Fund the course that is struggling the most financially and consistently. And what I am suggesting is, rather than closing that course because it's a money loser. Let's pull it into our park system. The community values it. I mean, it is named after this community, and it is a driving factor for many of us who live outside of that community to go to that community and be a part of it. But it's a driving factor also for people who live there of pride. It's a big piece of who they are. And we should respect that.
I don't believe we're yet at such a binary discussion about Rose Park. I know that we've definitely had we've looked at this ball from about every angle over the last many years, but I don't feel at this point that we're saying we either approve this or we close Rose Park Golf Course. I think that there are, as you said, there's a lot of ideas that have been put out there and have been shut down in one form or another, and that this council has often asked for considerations of third-party management and some broader whole enterprise fund proposals. And so anyway, I don't think we're at a binary point of closure or acceptance of your proposal.
Okay.
And I certainly appreciate the value of this golf course to the community, the value of the open space.
I think Derek had a question or comment.
I just want to be careful not to get too deep into this because I know that we are going to have more discussion on this later on. So I'll just go broadly for just a quick moment. And thank you for being here, Mayor.
You're welcome.
And thank you for thinking creatively in your budget about the problems that golf faces. And I don't know where we'll end up with this proposal at the end of the day, but it's worth a conversation, and so I appreciate that. To Erin's point about, riding her bike down there and the accessibility for the general public, moving this from the Golf Enterprise Fund into the general fund, well, yes, it is a subsidy, and I think philosophically we might be okay with that. For me, what I would love to see is greater accessibility for the broader community for any, if you are a second grade student at Lincoln Elementary, you can go to the park for free. I want them to be able to go to the golf course for free as well, if we're going to be subsidizing it from the general fund. So that's one concern, is accessibility, and not pricing anybody out if this is truly going to be a community course.
Right.
My second major issue and concern is that, putting this into the general fund today in fiscal year 2018's budget, what that does for the budget in fiscal year 2028 and 38 and 48. And we know that we have decades of deferred maintenance that need to be addressed on all of our courses, and this plan does nothing to address that. And so, according to our staff report, we're probably not going to have resources to make any capital improvements for almost 2 decades. And so, while I agree and I think that the vision that you've put forward is decent and good and has potential, I see this in some ways as also kicking the can down the road, and without having the resources available to really to fulfill your vision for this course.
Right. Well, as you know, we have deferred maintenance issues for all of our parks as well, and we are kicking that can. At the end of the day, we have to decide when we are going to bite the bullet on infrastructure and go after it in a way that really does matter in 2028, right? And that discussion needs to happen with all of us at the table. The other thing I will say is that if this council is willing to pay for the entire cost of running this course, I am open to that. If we want people to be able to play for free because we're moving this into a park system, then I support that. And we can reconfigure the budget based on that decision, if that's where the council would like to take it.
Mr. Chair.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think that I'm surprised, Derek, and I think of all the research we've seen about the interest in golf, even if we were to say that it is stagnant and not declining, that that kind of an investment from our general fund, really supported by parks at that point, is so significant. And in the face of other recreation and parks investments, and that kind of a dialogue, and even the one that's proposed here, is symptomatic of a greater dialogue that we should have around the creation of a parks district, where we continue to shift acreage and acreage upon our parks departments, from park strip medians in the central 9th area to 7th East, to the parks themselves, to open space acquisitions and our requests to better maintain properties we own. And we do not increase their funding proportionally. So that's a discussion that we aren't going to have today, but that's what we should be serious about. If we are serious about supporting this size of recreation as an addition to what we already have, we are not supporting parks enough, and we should contemplate their capacity as a taxing entity if we're going to do that.
So
Kind of a follow-up question to that.
So yeah, I have follow-ups to follow-ups to follow-ups. So hold your thought, James. So Derek, do you have additional questions or comments?
I'm not saying I support or don't support anything. I'm just raising
No,
some
that's
concerns.
and that's entirely appropriate at this point. So let's go to Charlie and then to James.
So, Mayor, thank you for your comments. You did say something about infrastructure and deferred maintenance that is actually one of the things that I'm the most concerned about with this proposal. And it's the notion that we're going to be putting, this on, or we're going to be shifting this into the Parks Division to fund without really increasing their funding. We're just saying, okay, well, we'll fund it out of the general fund. Well, there's only so much money, as we all know. So we don't have $800,000 new dollars. It's something that we're going to be requiring parks to do. And so, some of the things that I'm interested in hearing from Dan and you and your staff as this week progresses and as we prepare for next week, is how you plan on dealing with the deferred maintenance, not only from the Golf Enterprise Fund and the existing golf courses, but I'd also be very interested in hearing from Lisa Schaefer how she plans on dealing with the deferred maintenance in our existing parks, as well as the additional burden that's going to be coming on if we move forward with this. I'm open to the idea. I'm always interested in creative thinking. I do not want to close any golf course. That has never been something that I support or am interested in. But with this, and I think to Derek's point, I would be more comfortable if we were seeing, if there was a tidal wave of change that we're seeing towards Rose Park. What it looks like to me is that with this proposal, it's essentially just a general fund subsidy without really changing the way that we're looking at Rose Park. And this council and previous councils have spent a lot of time debating whether or not a general fund subsidy of the enterprise fund is justifiable. And we've come to the conclusion that it's not. Now, we may want to have that discussion again. It may, things may have changed. I'm not seeing that it's changed, but for me, this proposal doesn't necessarily go far enough to justify a general fund subsidy. But to Aaron's point, it certainly, I don't think we're at the point yet where it's either do this or Rose Park goes away. I think that there have been a number of things, a number of ideas that, you've mentioned that there are ideas that have been shut down. I'm not sure who you're implying is shutting those down, if it's the council shutting them down. I know that there are ideas that the council has proposed that the administration, not necessarily your administration, but previous administrations have shut down. And I think that it's important that we have that broader discussion, because there are things that if all of us are working and thinking together, that we can probably get to the bottom of this. But in the next week, if you could let me know, what the plan is for dealing with the deferred maintenance of the courses in the enterprise fund, and then Lisa, if you could let me know kind of what the plans are and what this would do to your ideas for funding some of the deferred maintenance in our existing parks, and what impact that would have, that would be helpful for me before next week.
I
So,
would like
thank
to,
you.
I think we might all like that information.
Yeah, and when I say me, I meant it
Right.
would go to everybody, but yeah.
Thanks, Charlie, James, and then Lisa.
Yeah.
And then I will get to you, Andrew.
I think everybody knows where I stand with this. Rose Park Golf Course is the heart of really the area over there. I'm not going to sit there and say it's a moneymaker or it's not a moneymaker. The issue that I have is I think it's a great plan. I'm excited to look forward to other opportunities. But I've asked, and I don't think it was of this administration, it was the prior administration, per park, what are we spending? And I'd like to see those numbers for like Sugar House or for Liberty Park, these regional parks where people are, they're destination parks. I'd like to see per acre what we're spending. And then if we're going to look at that, figure out how we're going to be able to spend that much at Rose Park as well. So we have something that's equivalent.
So James, are you requesting that information as part of the budget discussion? So Allison, can I just get you to track that for us, and we'll do some
I asked
follow-up?
about it, I think maybe it was a year and a half ago during one of the conversations, but just I was interested in seeing per park what we're spending. But Mayor, you laid it out really well with how you brought it forth. And for me, this is a bigger picture. That's why I'm not going to start talking, emotionally about Rose Park Golf Course. No matter what, if Rose Park is pulled out of the Golf Enterprise Fund, we're still in the red. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And if we're to look at it, when Rose Park started to decline, it's because construction projects started going in the middle of it. It was making money until a huge sewer line went in, and people started going around, and they couldn't bear the smell after golfing 8 holes, and they left on the 9th hole. The year after that, it was a huge water main that went through there. So these are regular people that are golfing that we're disrupting their golf game, and guess where they're going to go? They're going to go elsewhere where it's better maintained, where we're not having neglected maintenance or issues with clubhouses, or, you drive by Rose Park, and like you said, those 2 ugly buildings and the ugly little trailer that they've got there, it's embarrassing. I'm in real estate. Curb appeal is 99% of what you're doing, and we have no curb appeal there. It's embarrassing.
Right, there's real opportunity with that space.
Yeah, and it's been embarrassing for that for a decade or more. I mean, they just plop a trailer on there, let it get graffitied, and it's embarrassing. We had such a great catalytic start there where we could have, as a city, if we would have used our brain, looked at other ways that we could have brought in money, and we're just kicking the can. That's why, for me, we've got to look at it at a high level and not look at it as Rose Park. We've got to solve the problem as a golf enterprise fund if that's the way we're going to keep it as a golf enterprise fund.
Are you sure we can't get you to get emotional about it?
No, I can go on even more if you want. And hey, I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but you remember last time when we brought this up. I do need one. 90% of the people that came out and spoke about the golf courses, it was about Rose Park. I'm sorry, that's the way it was. They came out in droves because it is a community asset. It's more than just a golf course. Like the mayor said, it's the heart and soul of the area. It's so beautiful when the mayor talks about you've already done it. I'll do it next time. But
I totally baited you, James, and you took it. Yeah.
You've all heard it, but maybe people here in the audience haven't heard it. You start at the Regional Athletic Complex. You stay on the Jordan River Trail, and you can go you can go play soccer with your kids or watch rugby or whatever. You stay on the Jordan River Trail. You're at the Rose Park Golf Course. Take your kids putting or take them to the driving range. You stay on there. You can go to the disc golf. You stay on it. You're at the Day Riverside Library. You stay on it. You go to the Northwest Rec Center, and then it ends down for District 1 at the State Fairgrounds.
And soon it will actually continue.
That's right, with the nice bridge.
Mr. Chair, I'd like equal time to extol the benefits of Bonneville Golf Course.
Yes,
okay,
I'm with
we'll
you, Charlie.
have a
Nibley Park and Forestdale.
We'll schedule some time for each
to me,
district, and for District 3, we'll just talk about the cemetery.
It's much
because
bigger
we don't
than
have
what we're looking at right now.
Thank you, James. Lisa.
It was my turn about 5 people ago. Just mentioning that. I I appreciate that there's some creative thought going on here. I feel like it's a little bit disingenuous to start calling it a community golf course if it's still just offering the exact same things for the foreseeable future, because there's no funding for any of the nice other things we want to add to make it a community course. And so I'd love to see how we're going to fund some of those things that are being proposed. And I know you don't like this word, but do you want to do a golf bond? Do you want to put it out to the voters and see, is golf valuable enough that you would pay for it in a bond? Do you want it enough to put money towards golf courses or streets? And how do you decide that? Back when we were having the golf discussion 2 years ago, I kept a tally when people spoke in public meetings. And James is right. We had a lot of people speak about Rose Park. We also had a lot of people speak about Glendale. What I discovered, because I was chairing it, I asked people to say where they were from, what district they were in. And what I discovered is the majority of people who spoke in favor of Glendale did not live in Salt Lake City, do not pay Salt Lake City taxes, love to play at that golf course. The majority of people who played at Rose Park live in Salt Lake, pay Salt Lake taxes. So I'm one of the ones that would like to see, can we figure out a way, if it's truly a community asset, to lower the costs that we charge, that just like the Hive Pass, if you live in Salt Lake, you get a benefit to play there. But I don't know if we can afford to do it. So I think there's a variety of things we can look at, but as I said at the beginning, I think it's a little disingenuous to call it a community golf course if it's just still a golf course that down the road we hope we're going to add other things to. You know, call it whatever you want, but if it's still the exact same thing, it's still
Yeah, and it just wouldn't be the same thing, and that's part of the discussion that needs to happen with all of you is, what are we willing to do and allow to happen? Because some of it would require, working with public utilities, and do we want to do that? And some of it would require potential either leasing or selling of some property for development reasons and purposes that allow for there to be community assets built there. So it certainly, in my mind, isn't just moving a golf course and then keeping it the way it is. I see opportunity to invest in the riverbanks there. I see opportunity to create economic development windows for service and having access to some of the things that just don't exist there today, which is like bike rentals and
how
more
do you pay
food.
for it? But how do you pay for it? It's great to say we're going to have these amenities, but you got to put the money in up front to be able to do it. And where is that money going to come from? Because it's not the enterprise fund.
Right.
And if it's the general fund, it means we're taking it away from someplace else. You take something here, it comes from there.
And that's where the potential acquisition of public utilities, paying for that back 9. So.
Andrew, did you have some comment or question?
I appreciate the discussion, emotional or otherwise, today. A couple of questions that are not directly to Rose Park first. I'll come back to that, see if we can go somewhere else. Wing Point's not part of the Golf Enterprise Fund, but it's still part of this discussion. Talk to us about your time frame and what you're asking for this year.
The time frame on what?
Because last year we funded for 1-year cycle to protect the greens essentially and some basic maintenance. But you're asking for some more money this year. What's the actual time frame that we'd be looking at for what you're talking about?
Yeah, we just are requesting the same amount of money. Yeah.
Let me go ahead and answer that. So right now, the proposed budget, what you see for Wing Point is a lease payment to the airport of $62,000, I think, and some change. We anticipate, if we make some progress with the federal delegation and the FAA, and where there is positive signs there, that if we need to come back to you to keep the greens watered, we would probably do that in the first budget amendment. So the time frame is very short for us to get some answers back from Washington, and we're working with the delegation there, and over the next 8 weeks, we hope to have an answer, a definitive answer.
So the funding that Patrick's speaking about is coming to you in budget amendment number 6 of the current fiscal year. So that's a separate conversation. Within the budget, there is, last year we placed 60 some odd dollars, 60,000, 62, something like that, to fund watering at the Wing Point Golf Course to maintain the greens. That funding remains in the budget in FY 2018.
So
Sorry, I was confusing two different 60,000s.
And so were we, so
60,000
we're
last
set.
year?
It was 60,000, as I recall, yeah.
So we're looking at a proposal right now for additional funds of 60 some odd thousand for the lease, and then fiscal year 17-18, another 60,000 for maintenance.
But the maintenance isn't included in this budget opening.
Sorry,
In-
in budget amendment, the final budget amendment of this year is the request for the lease payment to the airport. And in the proposed budget for next year is $60,000 for watering of the green, or
In the
watering the
proposed
grass.
budget, not in a future budget amendment.
Correct.
Okay, so it is in this fiscal year budget amendment. Okay, great, thank you.
All right. So, I mean, the last time we talked about this, there was another similar time frame about getting an answer back about Wing Point, and we sort of passed that.
So
Why this time frame is?
Because there's some action in Congress right now. The Transportation Committee is, I think, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think the Transportation Committee, which deals with the FAA, is going through a renewal process right now over the next 8 weeks. And so this is the time to work with the Transportation Committee to see if we can get some movement from the FAA.
Okay. Second question, it's proposed to eliminate the director of golf position, is that correct? And use some of those savings for the deficit, is that what I saw?
Yeah, what the general purpose of that is Dan Dent, who's the Deputy Director for Public Services, was originally the golf director. We are kind of sharing that position between the two of us at this stage, so if he's going to continue to provide some support from his current position, I will be providing support from my position. We're basically, I guess you would say, tag teaming the roles and responsibilities there, so therefore that was an area we thought we could see some savings.
Okay. My question then goes to, we relied a lot on Dan, or you now, to get a very comprehensive plan. I think they've all alluded to this about the enterprise fund itself. How do we address that big pie, right? Having one less position essentially, or more responsibilities for both of you, going to compromise a very detailed plan for us going forward in a time frame that's realistic?
We hope not, but it's part of looking at all of our operations and finding, are there areas where we can have some savings? Are there areas that we can maybe have some economies of scale depending upon, equipment purchases, how we utilize staff, some of the different tasks that they do. Doesn't solve the issue. It's just one of many different things that we've identified over the last year or so, really putting golf under a microscope and saying, how can we attack this situation and come up with it? And so this was, I guess, some of that low-hanging fruit.
Right.
We thought, we can combine, our activities, we can combine our expertise, and we'll see how good we can do.
Without losing capacity.
Right.
And it's this planning phase of thing I'm getting at, because the planning piece is a huge part we're talking about right now. What's our overall sort of goal, and who's going to sort of be the point person to manage that for us?
My understanding that still would reside with Dan.
Okay.
Isn't there a proposal for the elimination of the director position?
That is our proposal, but Mr. Dent would still maintain his management over the golf as part of the Deputy Director for Operations of the department.
But the plan we're looking for is really for that which you are proposing to get out of golf. I mean, the capital investments, the community engagements. I don't understand.
Maybe we're not talking about the right thing. There is, in your proposal, there's an elimination of a FTE. Those responsibilities we anticipate will be absorbed at the deputy department level by Mr. Dent and by our associate director, Matt, over here. The larger plan that I think Councilman Johnston's talking about is something that we do have in development and we will bring back to you with.
Yes.
And that's the piece that I think you're looking for, Councilwoman.
Right.
So, Andrew, do you have additional
Yeah, just how detailed are we expecting your plan going forward, including Rose Park and the entire golf fund? We saw some proposal kind of concepts about, do you have a for-profit enterprise section? Do you have a public amenity section? Do you have some hybrid of that? But there wasn't some sort of the specific recommendation about how we deal with it. Is it going to be that specific coming in the next few weeks for us, or what should I anticipate, I guess?
Well,
Lisa Schaefer's going to join us.
Oh. Sorry.
Hi there, Lisa Schaefer, Public Services Director.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. I appreciate the question very much, and I also sincerely appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of the council members about the proposals that Dan has put together with his team. We have several different options, and the Rose Park proposal is integral to the success of some of those options, and I think we would welcome the opportunity to sit down and speak in depth about all of the plans that he's put together. So, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I'm trying to manage my own expectations of this. Am I expecting a plan that will, I think Charlie's point was valid, that will really tackle enterprise fund, and Rose Park's a small part of that?
Yes.
Or will this be sort of getting us through 6 months, a year, while we work on a comprehensive plan? What's the expectation?
Yes, and thank you for the clarification. No, absolutely, the plans that we would bring forward are an attempt to address the entire enterprise fund and make it sustainable in the long term.
I think it's important to realize, though, that any plans we bring forward are going to take time to implement, and so if there's an expectation that it's going to be solved tomorrow, you already know through your own experience that that's not the case.
Sure. I don't think I expect it to be solved quickly. I think that I'm new to the council, so I won't speak for the council, but my feeling is that it's been going on so long and sort of been pushed a little bit, saying we need to look at more data, we need to analyze a little further, we need some more plans, some more ideas to come up, and we've never gotten to a decision point. And I think Wing Point's a small sort of manifestation of that frustration of we were delaying a little farther to hope for another decision, and I think we're to a point, at least the feeling I'm getting is we need to do something. And would this plan be something we could take that and really do something, if it takes 5 years, whatever it is, would it lay that out?
Yeah, I think Dan's concepts are something that really is about multiple year gains that we would see. And to Councilmember Luke's point, if there are ideas that you would like for us to consider, make those known, because that's the first I've heard that there were ideas that were coming from your side of the table that have been shut down. That is not something that I had heard before. But would love to hear those ideas. And what I want to be able to do is to make sure that we are successful in whatever the strategy is. And I do believe that Dan Dent has really put forward some pretty thoughtful ideas and approaches that we need to vet out and determine where we want to land.
And I appreciate that, Mayor, and I'd also like to add that one of the recommendations that this council or previous councils brought forward was to hire someone that, I think the word was a game changer. I believe we have hired that person, and I think that we need to listen to, and I agree with Councilmember Johnston's assertion that it's really time to stop looking at data and start making a plan. We have a lot of data. Everybody's kind of tired of studying this to death. I think we need to come forward and come together to come up with a sustainable plan that will carry us forward, not just for now, not just getting us through the next budget cycle, but continuing on.
Thank you.
Andrew, Aaron, I believe, has...
I just want to wrap up that this proposal is in defiance of the general policy principles that this body created of general fund subsidy, and what sounds like, amongst a couple other things, liquidation of open space for commercial development or residential development. The back 9 are open space.
Yeah,
And you
no,
talked
that's
about-
not developable at all.
You talked about the potential for conversation with public utilities to purchase, to sell or purchase.
Well, they would acquire that property and keep it open space into perpetuity.
And that's a one-time revenue generation. It's
Right,
not an
which would
ongoing.
help us with some of this
It would
deficit
make
that we're talking about today.
a dent for a moment. But
Right,
the
and then
overall,
the other properties on there could be revenue generating if we are open to that.
and that's something that we haven't been open to. So I think that we've been asking for bold ideas. I don't actually think this is bold. I think this is saying, look, here's the pot of money. Why don't we just go here and make some justifications for using general fund dollars by making this a park and by connecting really connected spaces. So I guess what I want to say is, if you're going to make this kind of a proposal, then show us the steps to revenue generation right now, because I cannot support a general fund subsidy without a plan to get us into the black across this, not just for how parks would be supported ongoing for maintaining 1,000 acres additional, and what that kind of park definition means, but I need a plan, because there's too much against what we've said we wouldn't do and not enough of a plan to support it for me.
Okay.
Thank you, Aaron. Any additional comments or questions? Allison, I'm wondering if I could have you track something. One of the concerns I have, unfortunately, I was around in 2010 and 2011 when we were forced as a council to cut our budget by about $20 million, I think, over the 2 years. Unfortunately, most of that money came out of public services, and so I'm really aware of how severely that budget got cut there. I'm not sure we ever completely restored all that, and so I'm wondering, Allison, if that's something we can look at. But it highlights one of my concerns about adding additional strain on the public services budget, that it is insufficient today because it's truly a street repaving or water at a golf course if we have a hot season. But the other concern is that that was really the go-to place for saving money in a severe economic crisis. I'm not predicting another one, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a downturn, and I'm really concerned about the long-term threat to the general fund, and particularly to public services, as we add additional strain on that department for general fund budget items. So, Allison, if you can kind of see if we can track down at least some of that information to see where we are, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you all very much. We're going to continue this conversation. I think there are some great questions that came up as part of this discussion. Allison has been tracking those, and so we'll gather what information. Charlie and Cindy and I will look at our schedule over the next couple of weeks and see where this fits. I'm not sure where yet, but I think we'll probably need a couple weeks to get some of this information back. So that's probably what we'll anticipate doing. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We have another item on our agenda, which is item 10. It's a transit station area zoning district improvements. This is a final follow-up on this particular item. We're joined by Nick Tarbett. And Nick, do we have planning people too that are joining you? I've got Nick Norris, but I don't want to.
Daniel Echeverria.
Daniel, is he with us, or he's probably?
Looks like they're coming. I can see Nick in the hallway.
So, Nick, go ahead and get us started on where we are on this particular agenda item.
Okay. So this is a follow-up briefing to the first one the council had held back in March. A public hearing has also been held, and the council continued that at that time because of potential changes to the final ordinance. So there was a few outstanding questions about ways that the zoning could be amended in order to provide different incentives for affordable housing on 400 South or North Temple. Councilmember Rogers had that question, and we have that information in the staff memo. There's also some questions about the land use tables regarding breweries. So it might be easiest just to step through. I think we have about 3 or 4 issues in here that might be best just to step through, do straw polls. Also, tonight, there's the continued public hearing, and then the council can choose.
And potential action this evening.
If there are changes, we would probably recommend holding off on potential action so that we can get those made, since we don't really have time to go get that done tonight.
All right. Thank you, Nick and Daniel, for joining us. Anything you have to add? So before we go to straw polls, I just want to see if anybody has any questions or comments. James, one of the issues that we're revisiting is the housing component. Do you have anything you want to say about that as part of your addition to this zoning proposal?
I guess I just want to bring to light, didn't we receive, Nick, tell me if I'm wrong, some stuff from the attorney's office talking about if we were to separate?
Yeah, there was the question was asked whether or not there was going to be any fair housing issues with regards to dividing up the zoning that way. The attorney's office is here, and they said they could answer any questions you have on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that the rest of the council was aware, just in case, just bring that to light, so we put that on the table.
So it's on the table, so let's hear what the issues are.
Happy to answer any questions about that. After the council asked us to go back and revisit this, I dug into some of the case law, and a fairly recent U.S. Supreme Court case suggests to me that treating different areas of the city would be okay as long as you are trying to promote integration into neighborhoods where some underserved populations typically have not been allowed. So we're trying to break down the barriers. The court in this case was looking at vouchers and the patterns over the years of concentrations of minorities in certain areas, and found that to be problematic under the Fair Housing Act. And the court examined things that I don't know how deep you want me to go into it, disparate impact versus the discriminatory intent. But what the court left on the table was, I believe that this would be the kind of policy that would be defensible if you were to change whatever the balance of affordable housing credits would be in neighborhoods that are traditionally, I'm trying to be careful of my language here.
He's an attorney.
Traditionally underserved by populations that are protected classes.
So James, so that we're all on the same page, could you perhaps give a little clarity to what your concern was and the question that you originally had asked of the attorneys?
Well, now I don't want to get myself in trouble listening to him.
Margaret reminds me I need to use the term protected classes.
Okay.
The Fair Housing Act protects or prohibits discrimination against people based on race, gender, disability, and these are the protected classes that we're talking about.
So I think
I guess my main concern is that the Fair Park Community Council, they brought it to light. They just wanted to point out that there's been if you look at I-15, I know this is different than what we looked at before because it's been changed to accommodate, but there's been a lot more affordable units put on North Temple west of I-15 than there has been in the TSA zone east of I-15. And we kind of wanted to look at possibly a bell curve and capping that you know, for projects, if there are 300 units, say 50 units, and doing the you know, conversely over on the east side of I-15 and the TSA.
So I think the sort of question around the philosophy is, first of all, is there any challenge if the city had a different formula in one part of the city around TSA zones than they do in another? And my understanding is not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
But the question that becomes, I think, a little trickier are caps and, you know, limits in part of the city versus another part of the city. So I'm wondering if this is a situation where we might, rather than talk about caps, we might want to talk about subsidizing our formula, subsidizing, incentivizing in a different area, in a different way. And I think we're safer in that direction. Is that an accurate sort of legal?
Yeah, so if we're talking about caps, that's where we get into problems. If we're talking about perhaps more points in some areas, whereas you're still getting points in neighborhoods that traditionally do have protected classes that are well accommodated.
If we were,
about barriers and opportunities.
For example, if we were to say our formula for the east side of I-15 gives additional points in these districts than it does on the west side, that's
Right.
You're more comfortable with that kind of
I'm more
language.
comfortable with that as opposed to something that would say we're not accepting any more affordable housing
Right.
in a certain area.
And I want to point out that that is exactly how the point system for that is structured now, so that there's additional points if you're in the areas of opportunity identified by, I can't remember the.
And it's not designed. It's not. I-15 was just an arbitrary example. Right now, we're looking at designated areas of opportunity.
That's right, and those are right now all east of I-15, and so that it
So
works
James,
for
I
that.
guess the question is, do you feel comfortable those additional incentives as they're currently proposed are incentive enough?
The question, right? How do we really say that this is enough?
Well, the question is a 20-point difference enough? Is that going to offset the cost right now? We've gotten feedback on that from developers at all?
So I think the reality is that the points in this system from a zoning perspective probably are not going to be the thing that tips a project to provide affordable housing. There's going to be much bigger, more financial-based things that drive it. What we're trying to do is recognize that difficulty in the funding mechanisms and those resources that are available. So people are going through that because they are lengthy processes that are outside of, in many cases, the city's control. And so that's where we kind of want to recognize that effort as a reward instead of looking at it as a straight incentive.
Yeah, and I think, James, I'll speak here for a second if it's okay, Chair. I agree. I don't think this is going to be sufficient to change what we're talking about. I think it's a nice incentive for somebody who's debating and thinking about it, but it doesn't offset the speed of getting approved. Right. Is not going to offset in cost-wise or the land. And I think we need to have a very serious conversation on a policy level about our expectations across the city if we want to address that. If we're serious about that, we have to do it somewhere else. But on this one, though, have we gone far enough? I guess is my question. Are the points right now where we talk about 3 areas rated 3 or higher for opportunity, get 10 more points, 5 or higher is 20 more points. Have we talked about higher numbers than that? What was sort of the trade-off there?
So we did up the required amount of points to 125 points, and that's kind of a high number of points. It's already making it more difficult for a developer to come in and just get approved right off the bat. So 60 points, essentially you get half of your points from your affordable housing, and we don't want to fully detract from the other points that you could get. So it was sort of a balance there that you could get almost half your points from that, but still we'd like to see some other amenities added into the project.
And so the other points that you're concerned about are other types of amenities that you potentially could lose if someone went for all affordability.
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, does this address the problems we've seen on 4th South going east? as well? Because we talked a lot about going west and the affordability issue, the ratios, but going east is addressing that.
In terms of the issues related to affordability going east?
More, I think
or
they have
just
more
in
problems with
development?
aesthetics and develop.
Yeah, in development in general, we think it will. Obviously, there's things that you can't possibly foresee, right? And so we think that some of the scale and addressing the street and the actual development related issues, we think that we've addressed, and we've done that in a couple of ways. One is that we've added more design standards to the district and clarified some of those, and also other requirements like breaking up the buildings and mid-block walkways and things like that. But then we've also said if you're going to go above and beyond that, that's where we want to add those points. And so we've morphed those development guidelines to reflect things that are above and beyond what we are requiring.
One more question about design guidelines for single-family homes versus on kind of the TSA on street stuff we're talking about. We had a problem in Euclid where that was wrapped into it, and so any new homes going in had to come much closer to the sidewalk than anything around it. Is that mitigated in here as well?
As far as setbacks?
Yeah, setbacks, the construction on the building having certain percentage of glass and those kind of things that really.
Yeah, so because of the nature of the area, we've done a couple things. The first is that we've exempted the single-family and two-family buildings from the development score component. They still have to meet those setback requirements. And those are going to vary based on where in there they are. But I don't, maybe Daniel can comment on any changes to what those setbacks were.
And for clarity, Andrew, are you talking about new infill or modifications to existing single family within this zone?
Specifically new infill, which we had one person built a house in Euclid, and they had to bring their house way up to the street because that's what the TSA zone does, but no one else on that street does that. And their facade had to be very, very different than anybody else on the street because it was a TSA,
right, and
that sort of thing.
And part of that is that when we did the visioning for those areas, that some of those things were expected to change over time. And so when, obviously it doesn't change overnight, and so you do get those incremental things that look out of place when they're first built, but over time, those patterns start to change. And as part of this, we did not look at rezoning or changing any of the properties. And so we assume that those existing policies in our master plan, the North Temple Boulevard master plans, were still valid, and that change is somewhat expected.
So with current infill, then as it's written, you would still need to have that look, essentially, the
Generally, you could go through
shallower setback from the street than anything else.
They still have to abide by the point system, correct?
No, they do not. They're
but that's-
exempt from
that's
the point
eliminated.
system.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think this is a universal issue across the city because most TSA zones don't have this. But I think Euclid, where we ran into this, is very unique in that it's a single street that's well established that's sort of caught between a lot of things. And it forces somebody doing infill to have a much higher cost, and it also doesn't fit the community. And that was my concern about, can you take a street off the TSA zone, essentially, that's well established, or how do you handle that?
So the only option I think we would have would be to actually rezone a piece of the property, which would be an independent process. So did you look at that when you were looking at some of these areas?
We did not, like I said, we did not look at making any map amendments as part of this.
Hey, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Um,
I was just trying to imagine a scenario where we could exempt a single family, but I can't, because that would be through the whole zone. You can't do it through the whole zone, so.
I think this is an odd thing because you're not going to have, in most TSA zones, you're going to have a single-family home and then other uses along the street. You don't often have a full street that's well established that's nestled up against a Folsom Court or a North Temple that really should have that design element and a very different use to them, and that's where the hard piece comes in about how do you do that.
And part of that issue is, you could do something like saying that the setback for single-family dwellings is equal to the average of the block face or something. The problem with doing that approach is that TSA zone allows a lot of uses. So if somebody comes in and does something that's other than a single-family home, they'd be in that same situation. And so really the question really becomes, is it appropriate for that street to be zoned TSA? If it isn't, then that's a totally different
So
discussion and
that might
process.
be one of the options we have to look at, is examining whether or not there needs to be a tweak in the zoning on the ground in those locations. So that might be a follow-up to that. James, did you have something you wanted to add?
I do, and it's not a norm. It's a little bit off the wall. My question is, the mayor has this Blue Ribbon Commission for affordable housing, and I'm wondering if we can see if she would be willing to let you guys present to this group. It's a bunch of nonprofit developers. It's for-profit developers. It's Utah Housing Authority. There are just a lot of different people that are in this group that I would really like to have get some ideas bounced off of them. These are the people that would actually be doing the development.
So in regards to what would incentivize additional units?
Correct.
Okay.
And they meet next Tuesday. I think it's at 11 to 1. Maybe it's 11:30 to 1. But that way, I would just feel a lot more comfortable in getting these changes made and introduced if we can get some of their insight too. It's 11 to 1. I don't know if you can make that question of the mayor, Nick, to see if you guys can get on that agenda just to present and maybe get their minds working.
Yeah, I have no idea what agenda they have
Yeah.
or anything like that. We can certainly ask.
Derek.
I was looking through the transmittal here, and I'm wondering, is there a parking minimum?
No.
So
Correct.
a developer can choose not to include any parking if they desire.
Right.
Knowing what we've learned from the parking study that we received a briefing on mid last year around parking stalls and their impact on affordability, I wonder if we want to look at maybe tying no parking to some sort of point, so that, on the affordable housing component. So, about $225 per unit per month per parking stall. Okay. That was wordy. But I think that's pretty significant when we're looking at affordability. And so I wonder if that might be something we tie into the transit service area.
We've actually added points into the system for providing less parking than normally
Yeah, I see
someone
that.
would. So if you provide less than one parking stall, you can get I think
25,
20.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have built that in already. So if someone wanted to take advantage of that was building an affordable product, they could.
I don't know how exactly this incentivizes developers on the, in practicality, but I just was wanting to toss that out there.
So one of the things it occurs to me, just to remind the council members, is the planning department has been actually pretty alert to monitoring this zone and really responsive to modifications. It's a new zone in the city, relatively new, a couple of years old, and so as we saw development under the previous zone, we saw identified some challenges. The incentives weren't working like we had hoped they were, and so that's this modification. Certainly, I would expect the department to follow those very closely again, and to this is not a static kind of option. We can look at all types of incentives going forward as well.
And just so the council's aware, that's our plan for most of our zoning districts that are having this kind of development pressure that the TSA is zoning. So those districts where lots of things are happening, we want to be able to look at that and be more responsive than we have in the past.
So Nick, in response to one of the comments that James made, I would encourage you to see about exploring with Hand how to tie affordable financing packages into your incentive package. So if there was an opportunity to look at incentivizing it sort of at a couple levels. So if someone comes in with a proposal, is there a way to incentivize them ahead of the line in affordability application through Hand or something like that could really look at maybe encouraging the getting towards that component that you're a little unsure of, or at least I think I heard you unsure of, the sort of bottom line financing package. And we're talking a lot about design, and we're talking a lot about the appearance of a structure, but we aren't really getting into the underlying financing package of.
Right, and oftentimes those are things that rightfully so are kind of outside of a zoning type of thing.
So is that a possibility of looking at reaching out across to hand to see if there are opportunities to expand that incentivizing of affordable housing?
I'm going to actually have Mike Ackerlow weigh in on
this
that.
This is going in a very different direction, and I don't expect Mike to have a response to
it's a
today.
Bigger department-related type of...
Unless, of course, he's going to say, of course, and then I'm fine with it.
Of course.
Okay, there you go.
No, I think there are certainly ways that we want to look at to get more affordable housing. So any incentives we can give.
I'm intrigued with it, Mike, because I don't think we've ever really looked at the opportunities that might exist through our zoning, incentivizing affordability in target areas and tying that to a financial incentive as well. I'm intrigued with the idea of providing an option for developers to tempt them with some ability to finance their project through those incentives. So
okay, yeah, certainly we can look at that. And
so I just have one follow-up, and it's about breweries. And the question I have is that in the existing zone, we allow breweries of pretty much any size. In this new proposal, there are a couple of restrictions that have been added. Could you just walk me through the rationale for doing that?
So since the TSA zone was adopted 7 years ago, we've added new uses to the zone. So we took the opportunity, since we were looking at the land use tables, to see, are there things that we missed? Are there compatibility issues? Breweries was one of them. We were looking to see if uses were transit supportive, if they'd help ridership on the transit line, actually using those stations to their maximum potential. And a large brewery just didn't seem to fit that category. It also had potential conflicts with maybe some of the residential uses that are generally at the transit stations. So out of caution, we took those out, the large-scale breweries. We kept the small-scale breweries in there, along with brew pubs, but made those larger, made them in the transition areas, which are maybe near residential uses, a conditional use, just so we could make sure that we caught any potential negative impacts.
So does the current proposal make all of those larger conditional, or does it actually prohibit some of the?
The larger ones would be prohibited in 4 of the TSA zones that are more residential focused. Some of the more western TSA zones that have more of an office or special purpose, we kept them permitted there.
So this is a concern that I'm having based on sort of our history of looking at encouraging breweries, restaurants, microbreweries, the whole, who knows how the DABC defines them today. All we know is they're not restaurants. But how do we, creating capacity limits when I think we're experiencing, I'm not sure that we really have a good understanding of how some of these could integrate into a neighborhood. And so what I'm wondering about is I appreciate the caution on a large brewery, but I also have in other communities seen brew pubs that have developed or evolved into a pretty significant sized brewery but fit right into the neighborhood really well. So I'm wondering about, rather than be overly cautious, what your concerns would be if we suggested a conditional use at those levels, because it seems like what you're sharing with me are some of those concerns that may develop as size happens could potentially be accommodated through conditional use criteria as well.
So I think Wayne can add some insight to that too, because of the work he did with those changes. But I think one example that we do have in this city that's not a brewery, but it's a similar type of large-scale food production facility, is on 2100 South in Sugar House, the ice cream plant. And that has created some issues. It's not necessarily the type of development that we want to see, and in the Sugar House area. And so we've kind of have looked at that. Now, granted, there's a lot more requirements in this zone than in that, whatever that CC or CB zone, whatever it was when that was created. But it's an example of the impacts that could happen from those larger scale food production facilities, which a brewery really is, right?
Yeah. So the feedback I'm getting from some of the brewers is that some of our capacity limits may be artificially sort of stifling their ability to expand in their place without having the kind of impact I think we're concerned about. And I don't know that, I'm not sure I'm comfortable that we're there yet, that we really understand that this limit is the one limit that says, oh, now you have a problem with the neighborhood versus, 5,000 barrels above or below or wherever we end up with that. And I'm seeing a lot of activity. In particular, there's some areas on 4th West, which actually are in some of the old M1, but we've been traditionally moving those into TSA zones, that I'm just concerned about what seems to be a pretty vital improvement to the neighborhood might be squeezed out. And I'm wondering about the idea of tying it to restaurant service, or, there's several things that have come up for me around it. If it truly is if it's a Fisher type facility where there's food and activity, and the distinction for me is a brewery where it's just their primary focus is brewing, I don't know that I'm necessarily comfortable with the size limits we've put on it. So,
just to clarify a little bit, a lot of the breweries that we're seeing coming in now are actually a result of the changes that we made a couple of years ago to our brewery standards. We met with a couple of the brewers on how much beer that they brew, looked at some industry standards. Those were where the numbers came from. For example, Epic on State Street occupies about 7,500 square feet, and they brew, at their top, they were brewing about 10,000 barrels annually. So we worked with those individuals to determine where those caps would be, and the 15,000 would actually made it so Epic could even expand a little bit from where they are. So we kind of used them a little bit as a model for the scale of a small brewery. Knowing that once you get to, and even meeting with some of those folks, once you get above that level, you really start getting into more of a heavier manufacturing type. You've got larger trucks coming in, making deliveries and things of that nature. So those were some of where those numbers came from.
Okay.
We haven't heard yet, and from any of we've been working with a number of people that have been coming in looking for places to put breweries, and we haven't heard yet from any of those folks on that the cap has become a problem necessarily for them yet, but it would be interesting to hear where they're going, I guess, in the future.
I've had two breweries in particular, one brewery and one potential brewery that have expressed a concern about it to me. So, but it was sort of that, are we sure this is the right number kind of concern. So, okay. Any other questions, comments? So there's a continuation of the public hearing this evening. My suggestion would be that we close that public hearing and defer action to a future date to see what comments we have and to see what additional. Yes, Nick.
Can we still consider a couple of the straw polls?
Yeah.
Just for clarity's sake. So all the discussions that were held are pretty much, they pertain to the three, straw polls that I have identified. The first one being any changes to the brewery. So in the staff report on page 3, there's a proposal that would make the large breweries permitted in the core areas, but the conditional use in the transitional areas, which are the closer abutting to the residential areas. So that's one straw poll we could conduct if we want to make that change.
And so I'm not sure that I would modify that to say conditional use in all areas rather than permitted versus conditional.
So you would prefer conditional in all areas?
Yeah, I think so.
can that be the straw poll then?
That works? Sure. Any questions about that?
Yeah, will you say a little more?
I think I want to do a little more research, Nick, before I make a total position on this. My concern was that currently we've allowed breweries in some of the core areas, but the proposal puts a conditional use on some and prohibits others. So it puts a conditional use on the core and prohibits some in the others. Is that accurate? Am I saying that right? And that was my concern about that modification. And I see that we're anticipating some challenges with the use, but we don't, as far as I can tell, we don't have any current experience that says this has been a problem.
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood between what you said you wanted your straw poll to be.
That's because I modified what he said he wanted his straw
He's the
poll
boss,
to be.
you should listen to him, right?
So, go ahead and repeat that, Nick.
So the straw poll could simply be to make breweries a conditional use in the, so there's 4 zones where it's right now not permitted. Sorry, I'm flipping the wrong way.
Permitted.
No, they're not permitted. So there's 4 where they're currently not permitted. And so it would be to
For
make them
large.
conditional in the TSA UC, the TSA UN as conditional uses.
So, as I understand it, they split. The planning department recommended a split of saying they're not permitted in transitional, they're conditional use in core, and I was suggesting they just be permitted in transitional as a conditional use as well. So they were conditional use throughout the TSA. But I'm thinking I might want to go back and just check with people about those limits to see if they really are concerned about those limits.
And keep in mind that there's 4 of these sub-districts where they're permitted that are generally more removed from residential areas.
Right.
And so if you make them conditional across the board, they would be now.
It's more difficult.
It would be more difficult than what it currently is.
That's what I was hearing, that you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you want to make it more difficult.
I
Even
don't
in
want to make it more difficult.
I know, that doesn't sound like
Yeah,
you.
no, I want beer everywhere.
I didn't want to say
I
that.
want a
but
sign on the trucks delivering beer that says beer is in these trucks.
Why
Don't
didn't we
do
have beer
a bar
discussion
or a
during the
restaurant?
golf discussion? We need beer on the golf courses.
So actually, Nick, I'm going to say let's probably not straw poll it yet, because I need to get back to you on whether or not that's going to be a concern for the people who expressed to me that was a concern.
So if you're going to get back, does that mean by next week, or do we want to hold this off for a little bit?
I think I can do it.
Wait, can you
I
talk
would
about?
suggest that we have the public hearing tonight, and then maybe we defer actions for a couple weeks.
Okay.
And your other straw poll.
The other one is whether or not we would keep the current incentive system as is, in terms of what Councilmember Rogers
Right.
was asking about, but it sounds like if we're going to try to get that on the Blue Ribbon Commission agenda.
Yeah, but my sense, James, is that you're okay with leaving the incentive where it is, but we might want to look at providing some additional incentives down the road on some of those areas of opportunity. Is that correct? Do you want to straw poll that, or? Okay. All right.
Okay. And then the last one is a minor item that we really haven't discussed yet. During Councilmember Rogers' follow-up meeting with the administration, we talked shortly about the language in the design guidelines said that the affordability would stay for 15 years. And the question was raised, does that need to be changed? Does that need to be increased? After talking with the administration, that's pretty much tied to the tax credits, which most are all 15 years anyway. So changing that, if we did change that, compliance after 15 years would be difficult to maintain.
Are you talking about the 4% and the 9% tax credits?
Yeah.
I thought they were 50-year. Mike, they're only 15?
Yeah, they're 15 years for investors, but the housing trust fund that we operate is 55 years. So if there's any housing trust fund money that goes in, there's a longer.
So I think, James, that's going to have to be part of that housing discussion because we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the 15 years as being sort of the norm out there in the community right now. What Mike's talking about is a change that the city would like to incentivize for a longer term, but that's not currently an option for developers.
Right.
Unless they use city.
Unless they did it voluntarily. With some city dollars, but
Well,
looking at tying that to a housing incentive as well could get you
So
there.
just one follow, I do want to make that perfectly clear. The 4% and 9% tax credits are only 15 years.
The tax credits actually go for a 10-year period, but there's an additional 5 years that are added on. So actually the investors get their benefit for those first 10 years, but Utah Housing Corporation requires an additional 5. So that's where we come up with the 15 years.
Wow, I thought it was, but the housing trust fund is 55 years. So the housing trust fund is different than the 4 or the 9%.
Yes.
Oh, that's crazy. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. We good?
Thank you.
All right. I think we're good. Thank you, guys. Let's go have a beer. No, I'm kidding. I need to clarify that I'm kidding. This establishment is not licensed as a bar. So that is, do we have announcements? Let's have some announcements.
Could I ask Lehu to join us up here at the table? She's going to do one of these. First of all is budget amendment number 6. We are trying to get this processed, and it's one of the things that I believe John Vike mentioned earlier tonight, that there's some pieces of budgeting items that are critical to this year as well as influential on next year. This happens every year. It's not uncommon. The last budget amendment is like a cleanup opportunity. So we're confirming that the date has been set tonight on your agenda, and then briefing we have scheduled for May 23rd, public hearing June 6th, and potential action June 13th. And this is expedited, so that's why we're running it by you and asking for your approval.
Any concerns with that schedule? We're good?
Okay.
All right.
The next thing is some rules of decorum suggested changes. We've run these by the chair and vice chair, and this relates back to those people who occasionally will do filming, and it gets the general news media typically stays mostly out of the way, but occasionally we'll have people trying to get really creative shots and really invading the space and causing people to lose their train of thought or being blocked in or that type of thing. So we've added this wording to pave the way for the staff or the security people to say, please back off. You can't be 4 inches from someone's shoulder.
It will get rid of that close-up shot, but I didn't know that any of you would be concerned about that. So you okay with that? The close-up will have to be from
Mr.
a Zoom
DeMille.
across the way, so. Okay.
Okay. Then we have one change to the annual calendar that's listed here, and then I have another one to mention for you to think about. We need to add a formal meeting on June 13th. This is not extra. This is just an oversight. So you'll have 2 meetings in June at least. One is the work session and formal meeting on June 6th. The other is the RDA and work session, and then we're adding formal meeting on June 13th. That's where we hope you'll adopt the budget. That's typically the timeline where you make our best efforts to get that adopted. Worst case scenario, you could adopt it on the 20th of June, and if we do that, then that gives us all a really big headache. So working toward June 13th. Councilmember Adams had raised to our attention that the conference that was a very good conference last year on ending homelessness actually conflicts with your July City Council meeting and RDA meeting on July 18th. So I don't know how many people are interested in that. Our first step is we need to come back and see if the council approves that as one of our conferences. I think we mentioned it, but I'm not sure. And then we would need to revise the schedule if we have very many people going. So the way it could be revised that we were looking at is to take the July 18th meeting, scoot it to July 25th, but that's the day after the holiday, and then have RDA be on the meeting you've already scheduled for July 8th. So I'm not asking you to give us a decision or anything tonight, because I'm just telling it verbally, but keep that in mind and check your calendars to see if you are in town on July 25th. Now I'm going to ask Laihua if she can go through this agenda piece here, because it will help everyone know what's going on in the formal meeting.
So across the hall, you each have a new version of the agenda, and it's the same script that we've prepared for Councilmember Kitchen, just so everyone has the same version to flip through. By way of overview, in the past, what we've done when there has been LBA business for the council to do, we've bunched that into whatever section of the agenda it belonged with, right? So if you had minutes to approve in their unfinished business, you would recess as the council, do your LBA business, and then recess as, or adjourn as the LBA and reconvene. And it just gets really confusing, as I'm sure we've all observed, with motion sheets and with the different sections of the agenda and going back and forth. And so in working with the recorder's office and the attorney's office and our agenda staff, what we have now is the way that we're going to start doing meetings going forward for the formal meeting. And that is, on the front cover sheet, it will list that it is the business of Salt Lake City Council, the RDA, and the LBA. And then on the inside, you'll see that when you get to the first page, it is all the LBA business. So we are bunching all the LBA business together. You're going to begin the meeting, convening it as the LBA, do that business, and then adjourn that portion of the meeting. And then as you flip the page, you'll see the next section is the RDA business. And then you will convene that meeting, go through all the RDA related business and adjourn, and then begin the city council stuff. A few other little miscellaneous notes. We will, as a general rule, put all of the opening ceremony items like the pledge and the welcome and standards of conduct and those items on whatever of those agendas is appearing first. So if all you have is council business, then that's where it will be. But when the LBA is happening and that one comes first, then we'll put them all there, because you don't need to do it multiple times, but you want to do it at the beginning for all public hearings and comment.
Leihua, for my clarification, the chair running the meeting has the authority to adjourn the section we're in and just move on, correct? We don't need to take a motion or anything like that?
Exactly. So just like you have always done as part of your council meetings, and I went back and listened to recordings to make sure, and the attorney's office is confirmed, that at the end you generally say something like, that concludes our business for this evening and this meeting stands adjourned. And so that practice without a motion works as you are completing each of these entities' business and moving on to the next.
So for clarity, it would probably make some sense to say we are now adjourned for the local business authority or something to that effect, so that we can the public can follow where we are.
Yes.
Yeah. And is that written into the?
It is on the script, and I'm sorry, we should have thought ahead and had them here for you.
That's okay.
But it does, so that it's as clear as possible in our hat analogy that you're taking off the hat of the LBA and putting on your next hat.
Okay.
The other thing that will be handled that way are the minutes. You may recall that for the LBA, we have done that as an unfinished business item with a motion, but that will no longer happen. They will be in an opening ceremony, and you will do that as you have in the council meetings in the past. So.
Okay.
I hope that helps. I'm sorry this has been a little bit of a confusing road, but we're hopeful that this will help not only for council clarity, but then also for the public should they want to go back and find any of the records. They don't have to scroll through a council meeting to get to the correct section. They will just have all of that entity's business in one place that they can find. The other just small note, is that the council's rules and procedures are quite specific about the sections of the agenda and how they're numbered. And so we'll be bringing that back to you to update that to make sure that it's reflective. And if the council ever just has a meeting where it's really just council business, then we have the clean cover sheet and a clean council agenda format that will still follow.
Yeah, thanks, and yeah,
Let's wait until like 8:30.
We'll see how it goes.
For 7:30. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for your patience.
And that concludes our announcements. We will adjourn our work session and reconvene across the hall at 7 o'clock. And I believe Derek Kitchen will be running our meeting, so he gets to try it out. So be supportive. So thanks.